Hello, friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? My name is Ethan Reynolds. I'm 35 years old and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. Or at least I used to, before everything went wrong. I took the job as a park ranger in the remote wilderness of the Nantahala National Forest out of desperation more than anything else. I had always enjoyed spending time outdoors hiking and camping, so when I found myself drowning in credit card debt and barely making ends meet waiting tables, the prospect of a steady government job patrolling the backcountry seemed like a godsend. Little did I know the nightmare I was walking into. The pay was meager, but it came with rustic park housing, which allowed me to get out from under my pile of bills. I packed up my studio apartment, said goodbye to my few friends in Asheville, and made the winding drive out to the ranger station that would be my new home, surrounded by miles and miles of dense forest. My days quickly fell into a routine. Wake up at dawn, hike the trails looking for any signs of trouble, help the occasional lost tourist find their way, then return to my cabin as the sun slipped below the ridgeline. The solitude suited me. I had plenty of books to keep me occupied in the evenings, and the peace and quiet was a welcome change after the constant bustle of the city. But then the strange thing started happening. It began small at first. Eerie sounds in the night that I dismissed as the wind. Tools disappearing from the ranger station only to reappear in odd places. That kind of thing. I chalked it up to the isolation playing tricks on my mind. Then I started to find the dead animals. Deer, mostly. Their bodies contorted and broken, with strange symbols carved into their flesh. There were no predator tracks surrounding the carcasses, no signs of any physical struggle. It was as if something had just snapped the life out of them and left the mutilated remains behind. Each one I found sent a new shiver up my spine. I had heard the old stories about these woods, of course. The Cherokee legends about the spirits that roamed the misty hollows. The pioneer tales of strange creatures glimpsed in the trees. I always assumed they were nothing more than colorful myths, but alone out there, with the unnatural things I was seeing, I wasn't so sure anymore. I radioed in the dead animals, but my reports were met with indifference from the main office. Everyone knew weird stories got passed around these remote postings, and most rangers had an odd encounter or two to share around the campfire. They told me not to worry about it. I tried to put it out of my mind and focus on my work. But the deeper I ventured into the shadowy heart of the forest, the more I could feel something out there in the trees, watching me, stalking me. Something ancient and dark and hungry. And then the hikers started to vanish. The first one to disappear was a young woman, a solo hiker who had set off into the backcountry 2 days earlier. When she failed to return to her car by the expected time, I was sent out to search for her along the trail she had planned to follow. I found her pack about 5 miles in, propped neatly against a tree with her sleeping bag still rolled up inside. There was no sign of any struggle nearby, no blood or torn clothing or anything of that sort. She had just vanished into thin air. It was as if she had been plucked off the trail by an invisible hand. We mounted a massive search, calling in rangers from all over the state to comb through miles of dense underbrush. Helicopters buzzed overhead day and night, but after a week with no clues and no leads, the search was called off. The official report stated that she must have gotten injured off-trail and perished in the wilderness. But I knew there had to be more to the story than that. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, it was an older man, a birdwatcher who knew the area well. He had radioed the ranger station to check in from a remote ridge one evening, but never made it back to the trailhead. I retraced his steps and found his favorite binoculars lying abandoned by the path. The neck strap snapped clean through. Once again, we turned the forest upside down looking for him, but there was no trace to be found. It was like the trees themselves had swallowed him up. When darkness fell, I made my way back to the trailhead with a deep sense of unease knotting my stomach. I sat up late that night in my cabin, poring over old books of Cherokee legends and pioneer tales, trying to find anything that matched the disturbing pattern of disappearances and mutilated animals. Most of it was the usual mishmash of folk stories and fairy tales, but there was one passage that I kept coming back to, a chilling line from an old diary kept by a fur trapper who roamed these hills back in the 1800s. "The trees here are wrong," the faded ink read. "When the wind blows through the branches, you can hear them whispering to each other, plotting. They are dark and old and bloodthirsty. It ain't safe for men alone in these woods." I shuddered and slammed the book shut. It was just the ramblings of a superstitious old mountain man, I told myself. There was nothing out there in the forest but shadows and starlight. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Still, I double-checked the locks on my door before I finally drifted off into a restless sleep. That night I dreamed I was lost, deep in the woods, the trees closing in around me, their limbs reaching out to catch and tear and crush. When I jerked awake in the pale light of dawn, my sheets were soaked with sweat, and my heart was pounding like a drum against my ribcage. The feeling of being watched prickled the back of my neck. I knew then that something was terribly wrong in the Nantahala, and that I was running out of time to figure out what it was. The disappearances continued. Each one ratcheted up the tension and paranoia among the small community of rangers and wilderness experts in the Nantahala. Theories flew back and forth: wild animals, serial killers, even something about UFO abductions. But I knew the truth was much older and much darker than that. I threw myself into research, spending every free moment combing through dusty archives and forgotten texts, looking for anything that could explain the deadly pattern. The deeper I dug, the clearer the grim picture became. The legends of dark spirits in the forest stretched back centuries, predating even the Cherokee. There were stories of man-eating giants roosting in the hills, of strange glowing creatures that could mesmerize their prey, of trees that came to life and hungered for blood, all centered on this specific patch of woods. The fur trapper whose diary I had read was far from the only early pioneer to encounter the sinister forces in the Nantahala. I found faded newspaper clippings detailing the gruesome discoveries of bodies strung up in the high branches, their faces frozen masks of terror. The victims were always those who ventured out alone into the backcountry: trappers, prospectors, lone hunters. As the frontier was settled and the forest pushed back, the dark incidents seemed to taper off. There was a span of almost 100 years without any further reports. The evil appeared to have gone dormant, fading into half-remembered campfire tales. But it had never vanished completely. Every few decades, when the conditions were right, it would reawaken to feed. A rash of disappearances in the 1930s, a string of grisly murders in the 70s, all officially attributed to animal attacks or human killers, and soon forgotten. Now the cycle was beginning again. But this time, I was determined to stop it. I didn't know yet what I was up against or how to fight back against it. All I knew for certain was that an ancient malevolence lurked in the woods, and that I was the only one who seemed to understand the true scope of the danger. I tried to warn the other rangers, to make them see the signs and take precautions, but my talk of dark spirits and bloodthirsty trees was met with raised eyebrows and condescending chuckles. I could tell they were starting to question my sanity, wondering if the isolation of the job was getting to me. Fine, I thought bitterly. Let them think I'm crazy. I knew I would have to face this alone. I began preparing, gathering what crude weapons and wards I could cobble together based on my research. Iron railroad spikes and silver crosses, and herbs plucked under the light of the full moon. I would hike out to the sites of the disappearances and do what I could to cleanse them, following the old instructions I had uncovered. I knew it was only a stopgap measure. Whatever force was out there, it was old and cunning, and it had marked me as a threat. I could feel its malignant presence pressing against the edges of my consciousness when I closed my eyes at night. I slept with a hatchet under my pillow and took to rubbing protective sigils on my skin with white clay. But I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me. The final turning point came on a misty fall morning when I was hiking near the spot where the old fur trapper's body had been found all those years ago, his flesh flayed and his bones snapped like kindling. The sun was just starting to burn through the fog when I saw it. A figure standing dead still in the center of the trail ahead of me. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but as I drew closer, a shiver of pure terror ran through me. It was shaped like a man, but no man had ever moved like that, with the impossible boneless fluidity of a serpent. And when it turned to look at me, I saw that it had no face, only a writhing mass of roots and leaves and dark pulsing matter. The creature opened its awful maw, and a sound emerged that I can only describe as the scream of a dying forest. Then it came for me, loping down the trail with terrible speed, the trees themselves seeming to bend and sway to aid its passage. I turned and ran, my heart feeling like it would burst out of my chest. I crashed blindly through the underbrush, heedless of the branches that tore at my face and arms. I could hear the creature bearing down on me, feel the heat of its unnatural breath on the back of my neck. Somehow, I made it back to the ranger station. I slammed the door behind me and slid to the floor, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I knew I could never outrun the thing in the woods. It was toying with me, like a cat playing with an injured mouse. I would have to turn and fight, but God help me, I had no idea if I was strong enough to face it and survive. All I could do was pray that my research and preparations would be enough. Because one way or another, the next time I stepped into those woods, only one of us would be coming back out. And the fate of everyone who entered the Nantahala might depend on which one of us it was. I spent the next week fortifying the ranger station as best I could, carving protective symbols into the door frames and windowsills, hanging wreaths of garlic and rowan over the entryways. I knew it wouldn't keep the creature out forever, but I hoped it would at least prevent it from ambushing me in my sleep. My research had yielded precious few clues on how to actually kill the thing. The old pioneers had been maddeningly vague in their accounts, attributing their survival more to luck or divine intervention than any specific weapon or tactic. The only consistent threads seemed to be fire, silver, and running water. Three things that crop up again and again in folklore as a means to ward off evil. I had a small silver cross left to me by my grandmother, which I now wore at all times. For running water, the best I could manage was a series of water bottles, blessed by the priest in the tiny mountain chapel down in the valley. The fire, at least, I had covered. My time in the backcountry had made me proficient with all sorts of pyrotechnic devices, from flare guns to Molotov cocktails. I tried to act as normally as possible during my ranger duties, not wanting to tip my hand or raise suspicions any further. But all the while, I was scouting for the perfect place to make my stand against the creature. It had to be a spot where I could limit its avenues of approach and use the terrain to my advantage. I settled on a narrow box canyon about a day's hike from the ranger station. The steep cliff walls would restrict its movements, and there was a decent-sized stream at the back of the canyon where I could make a last stand if things went badly. I cached food, water, and supplies near the canyon over the course of several days, trying to avoid drawing attention to my preparations. My fellow rangers seemed relieved that I had stopped babbling about dark spirits and bloodthirsty trees. I could tell they hoped I had simply snapped out of whatever strange funk had gripped me. If only they knew the truth. If only they could see the shadow that fell over the station at night, darker than dark, and hear the creaking of the trees as they swayed without wind, hungry for blood. On the night of the next new moon, when I knew the creature's power would be at its peak, I hiked out to the box canyon with grim determination. The blackness under the forest canopy was total. Even the animals and insects seemed to be holding their breath, sensing the malevolence that lurked in the woods. I made my way to the spot I had chosen near the back of the canyon, a flat shelf of rock with a sheer drop behind me and a commanding view of the approach. I arranged my weaponry, a crude silver-tipped spear, a brace of Molotov cocktails, a flare gun, and a final failsafe of a World War II era grenade I had stolen from a collector in town. Then I sat cross-legged on the cold stone, my senses straining against the gloom, the silver cross clutched in one white-knuckled hand, and waited. It was almost a relief when I finally heard it approaching. A wave of dread and nausea rolled over me as it drew closer, the forest itself seeming to warp and twist around the wrongness of its presence. I could feel the beat of its awful heart in my chest, cold and slow and rotted. I held my breath, not daring to move a muscle, as a shadowy figure emerged from the tree line on the far side of the canyon. It was vaguely man-shaped, but again the proportions were subtly wrong, the limbs too long and boneless. In the moonlight, I could see that its flesh had the mottled color and texture of a fungus. The creature flowed forward, moving more like an eel than a human being. As it crossed the open ground, the grass beneath its feet withered and died. It halted 10 yards from my position and raised its head to face me. Up close, I could see the seething mass of its face, pulsing with inner darkness. When it opened its maw to let out a rattling hiss, I saw that its teeth were jagged splinters of bone. "Finally," it rasped, its voice like sandpaper on my mind. "I was worried you had turned coward, little fleshling. It has been far too long since one of your kind dared to challenge me." I licked my dry lips and tightened my grip on the spear. "I'm no coward," I said, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "And I'm not about to let you kill anyone else." It chuckled, a sound like millipedes crawling through dead leaves. "You have no say in the matter. These lands were mine long before your mewling species spread across them like a fungus. Your blood is my birthright." "Not tonight," I snarled, and with that, I hurled my first Molotov directly at the nightmare figure before me. The jar shattered against its chest and blossomed into a bright gout of flame. The creature howled, more in rage than in pain, as the fire licked across its unnatural flesh. It charged forward, taloned hands outstretched. I sidestepped its first wild swipe and drove my silver-tipped spear deep into its torso, right where a human's heart would be. The creature shrieked and black ichor sprayed from the wound, sizzling where it sprayed across my face and hands. But still it kept coming, yanking the spear out of its chest and snapping the haft like a twig. I backpedaled, fumbling for my flare gun as it barreled into me with the force of a battering ram. We tumbled to the rocky ground, rolling over and over as I struggled to bring my flare gun to bear. The creature's breath was indescribably foul, its impossibly strong hands grabbing for my throat. I finally managed to jam the barrel of the flare gun against the underside of its jaw and pulled the trigger. The flare punched a fist-sized hole through the top of its skull, spraying burning phosphorus in every direction. The creature convulsed and rolled off of me, hands clawing spastically at its ruined head. I scrambled back to my feet, my heart hammering against my sternum. The creature was still twitching and mewling, but I staggered back to my feet, my chest heaving, my skin blistered from the spray of the flare. The creature was still writhing on the ground, ichor spurting from the ruined crater of its head. But I knew a wound like that wouldn't keep it down for long. I had to press my advantage while I had the chance. I snatched up one of the blessed water bottles and began dousing the squirming thing, the liquid sizzling and steaming everywhere it touched that profane flesh. "You think your little wards can stop me?" the creature gurgled, its voice thick and choked with its own fluids. "I am the rot in the heart of the forest, the darkness between the stars. I will flay the skin from your bones and pick my teeth with your ribs." But I could hear the pain, the fear underneath its mocking words. It was weakening. I just had to keep pushing. I upended the rest of the bottles over it, then grabbed the can of salt I had brought and began pouring a thick circle around the creature's spasming form. I remembered reading that salt was pure, anathema to many unclean things. As I completed the circle, the monster let out a jabbering screech that made my head feel like it was splitting open. It thrashed and flailed, but could not seem to cross the saline boundary. The salt was working. For a moment I let myself believe that I had done it, that I had bound the creature. But even as I watched, I saw its wounds begin to knit closed, its spilled ichor drawing back into its body. It was healing, and quickly. "No, no, no," I muttered, fumbling for the grenade on my belt. This was my failsafe, my doomsday option. I had no idea if it would work, but I had no other choice. The creature sensed my intent and started to laugh, even as the gashes in its face sealed shut. "You only delay the inevitable, mortal," it hissed. "In the end, the forest will have its due." I swallowed hard, my thumb hovering over the grenade pin. "Maybe," I said through clenched teeth, "but it won't be tonight." And with that, I yanked the pin free and dropped the grenade directly onto the monster's chest. I only had a few seconds. As soon as the spoon popped free, I turned and sprinted for the creek at the rear of the canyon, covering my head with my arms. I heard the creature howl with renewed fury behind me. Then the grenade went off, and the world turned white. The concussion lifted me off my feet and sent me pinwheeling into space. I had a vague sensation of tumbling end over end. Then I struck the icy waters of the creek, and everything went dark. I don't know how long I floated in that blackness. It could have been seconds or days. All I could perceive was a bone-deep cold and a slow, distant thudding that might have been my heartbeat. Then, with a painful jerk, I surfaced back into consciousness. I was lying half in, half out of the creek, my clothes heavy with moisture, pine needles and bits of dead leaves plastered to my skin. Every inch of my body hurt. Groaning, I levered myself up onto my hands and knees. It was still dark, but dawn couldn't be far off. I could see the pale gleam of the canyon walls rising up on either side of me. And there, 20 feet away, at the epicenter of a blackened crater of earth, lay the smoking remains of the creature. The grenade had nearly torn it in half, scattering lumps of spongy, fungoid flesh in a wide radius. As I watched, stunned, the lump that had been its head pulsed once, twice. A baleful yellow eye swiveled to fix me with its loathing gaze. Its jaws parted, and a venomous green fluid dribbled from the corners of its mouth. "This isn't over, son of man," it croaked, its voice a bare whisper. "The forest is vast and its hunger is eternal. I am the least of the Dark Ones. My brethren will hear of what you have done, and they will avenge me. There will be a reckoning." Then the yellow light in its eye went out, and the remains crumbled into a heap of humus and mulch. I sat there for a long time, watching thin ribbons of smoke rise from the thing's remains. I knew in my marrow that it hadn't been lying. There were others of its ilk out there in the darkness under the trees, creatures that walked unseen in the shadow of mankind's world. And I had just declared war on them, but what choice did I have? To leave those monsters to prey on the innocent, to cull us from the edges of our civilization like wolves harvesting a flock? No. I had been granted a harrowing glimpse behind the veil, and now I had a responsibility, a grim purpose. I would be the watchman on the frontier, the silver flame burning against the encroaching night. I would hunt the hunters and make the dark places safe again, no matter the cost to myself. In the east, the sky was beginning to pale towards dawn. I hauled myself to my feet, my joints creaking and popping. There was a town at the bottom of this mountain where I could get cleaned up, resupply, spin some story to explain my battered state. Then I would head back into the Nantahala, and from there, wherever the night things dwelled and blooded, I had work to do. But as I limped out of that accursed canyon, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that in the trackless depths of the forest, something old and cruel had marked my name, and that an accounting would be required, sooner or later. Such is the burden of a ranger. We walk the edge of the map and hold the line against the things that lurk beyond it. But out there, on the frontier between the wild and the civilized, the line is never as clear or certain as the folks back in town would like to think. Sometimes the only way to beat back the darkness is to carry a piece of it inside you, to become the very thing you hunt. As I hiked into the waiting trees, I wondered how big a piece I was willing to carve out, and I wondered what would be left of Ethan Reynolds when all of this was over. The next few months passed in a blur of blood and shadow. I resigned my post at the Nantahala and took to the road, following the threads of strange disappearances and unsolved murders that all led back to wild places. I hiked the mist-shrouded canyons of the Pacific Northwest and slogged through the fetid swamps of Louisiana. I stalked my eldritch prey through the pine barrens of New Jersey and the snow-choked passes of the Rocky Mountains. Anywhere the map showed more green than gray, I would find my way there, and inevitably confront some fresh horror from beyond the periphery of mankind's domain. I sent a number of those horrors back to whatever fungal hell they'd crawled out of, emptying my guns and swinging my blades until ichor drenched the leaf litter and the thing stopped twitching. But for every creature I put down, there always seemed to be another waiting in the next patch of dark woods, its hunger whetted for mortal flesh. The work changed me. in ways both subtle and profound. I took to the rituals and wards like a convert to a new religion, etching eldritch sigils into my own skin and sleeping with wreaths of garlic and rowan twined around my neck. Silver rings adorned every finger, and I never went anywhere without a pouch of grave dirt and a vial of virgin's blood close at hand. People began to talk, to whisper. They said I had become something not unlike the very creatures I hunted, that I carried a darkness inside me now, a stain that could never be fully scoured clean. I suppose they weren't wrong. You can't wade in the muck as long as I had without some of it clinging to your boots. And the dreams, dear God, the dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that leafy canyon and the horror I had faced there. But instead of flares and holy water, it was my own hands I thrust into the creature's fungal flesh. My own teeth I sank into its squirming innards as it screamed and begged beneath me. I would awaken from these grim visions drenched in cold sweat, my jaw aching and my nails bitten to bleeding crescents. A change was coming over me. The more I walked the shadow, the deeper it sank into my bones. How much longer until I became no different than the things I hunted? One cold autumn morning, I found myself hiking through a familiar stretch of woods in western North Carolina, my boots crunching in the carpet of fallen leaves. These trees seemed to whisper to me as I passed beneath their bare branches, a sly rustling that might have been the wind, or might not. I knew why I'd come back to the Nantahala. I had killed the thing in the Box Canyon, true, but it had only been a foot soldier, a lone sentinel. I could feel in my corrupted marrow that the source of the darkness, the great heart of the dreadful forest, still beat somewhere ahead of me. It had drawn me here. An unclean lure sunk deep in my soul. As I moved up the ridge, the air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. My limbs felt slow and clumsy, as if I was wading through a mire that reached to the tops of the trees. I could feel a presence ahead, stronger than anything I had yet encountered. The Alpha and the Omega of the fungal gods. I crested the rise and found myself in a blackened scar of a clearing. The trees here were twisted and stunted, their skeletal limbs grasping at the sullen sky. Nothing grew among the charred stumps and lumps of fused glass that studded the scorched earth. It was as if a great fire had smitten this patch of ground, a conflagration hot enough to melt the very bones of the world. And there, in the center of that blasted heath, rose a rounded hummock of stone about the size of a two-story suburban house. Every inch of it was carved with spiral patterns and glyphs that made my eyes water to look upon them. It was a thing that should not be, an abomination to the rational order of the universe. One end of the stone mound gaped open, a cave mouth leading down into unfathomable darkness. The reek of rotting things rolled out of that abyss, undercut by a strange spicy musk that made my gorge rise. There was no doubt in my mind that this was the source I sought, the dweller in the dark heart of the unholy forest. I unslung the old double-barrel shotgun from my shoulder, thumbing open the breech to check that it was still loaded with the silver flechettes I had cast myself. It was a paltry weapon against the kind of power that lurked in this place, but it was all I had. For a moment, I considered turning and walking away. Surely I had done enough, sent enough of these nightmares back to the abyss. Did I really need to descend into the very bowels of the horror, to confront the god of the dark forest in its lair? Surely that was madness. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I had no choice. This was the culmination of the path I had set myself upon, ever since I had first learned the true nature of the world that crept beyond the edges of the firelight. If I turned away now, the rot and the horror would only grow, spread, consume. And if the world must have a monster, let it be one of my own choosing. I raised the shotgun, cocked both hammers, and strode towards the gaping maw of the cave. Around me, the stunted trees seemed to quiver in obscene delight, their emaciated boughs rattling together like the legs of eager carrion bugs. "All right, you son of a bitch," I growled to the unseen presence that throbbed like a canker beneath the earth. "Here I come, and hell's coming with me." And with those words, I disappeared into the dark mouth of the mountain, where no light and no hope could reach. I would walk in the shadow one final time, and may God have mercy on anything that tried to bar my path. The cave swallowed me whole, plunging me into a darkness so complete that it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eyeballs. The air was thick and cloying, redolent with the stench of mold and corruption. I could hear liquid sounds in the depths, a viscous dripping like the saliva of some vast predator. I advanced slowly, my shotgun leading the way, my finger tight on the trigger. The narrow beam of my flashlight seemed to be absorbed by the gloom, illuminating nothing but a few twisted stalactites hanging from the unseen ceiling. It was like trying to light my way with a candle in a coal mine. Something skittered in the darkness to my left, something with too many legs. I spun, my light stabbing wildly, but caught only a fleeting impression of glistening chitin and faceted eyes before the thing vanished back into the shadows. A centipede the size of an anaconda, or something far worse. I forced down the gorge rising in my throat and pushed on. The passage was sloping downward at a steep angle, the rock slick and spongy beneath my feet. Fungal tendrils hung from the walls, pulpy and obscene. They seemed to reach for me as I passed, like the grasping arms of lepers. The tunnel opened into a great echoing void, a cavern so vast that my feeble light could not find its far walls. The spongy floor gave way to a great dais of pitted stone, shot through with pulsing veins of luminous lichen. At the center of the dais rose a massive column of writhing, fungoid flesh, towering up into the gloom until it disappeared from view. The column shifted and shuddered, and an eye opened in its side, milky and immense. Then another and another, until the whole towering mass was gazing down at me with cold, inhuman awareness. "Welcome, Ethan Reynolds," a voice boomed out, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It sounded like the groaning of continents, the slow grinding of tectonic plates. "I have been expecting you." I raised my shotgun, but it suddenly felt about as significant as a child's water pistol in my hands. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" "I am the voice in the shadow of the leaves," the towering thing intoned. "The spore on the wind, the mold in the crack of ruin. I am the power that watches from the fungal throne, and has done so since before your simian forebears first shambled out of the trees. As for what I want..." I felt something cold and slimy wrap around my ankle, yanking me off my feet. I landed hard on my back, my shotgun clattering from my grip. More tendrils erupted from the dais, coiling around my arms, my legs, my throat. They reeked of decay. "I want what is owed," the voice thundered, as I was dragged inexorably towards the body of the column. "The tithe of blood and marrow that your kind has denied us for far too long. We, who were ancient before the first foundations of your cities were laid. We, who will inherit the earth long after the last of your misbegotten race has crumbled to dust." The tendrils jerked me into the air, dangling me before that forest of milky eyes like a worm on a hook. I struggled, but their grip was implacable. "But you need not perish this day. I have watched you, Ethan Reynolds, tasted your dreams, so much anger in you, so much delicious despair. You need not be our enemy. Join us, and you will never again know fear or doubt. You will be one with the night everlasting." The pain and horror that had dogged my steps for so long rose up in me like a dark tide, tempting, beguiling, to rest at last, to never again feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. It would be so easy. But even as the thought crossed my mind, a fierce and cleansing rage ignited in my breast. No, I would not submit. I would not let this foul thing make a meal of me, not after everything I had endured. I was Ethan goddamned Reynolds, and I had not come this far just to die whimpering in the dark. My hand closed around the silver-plated Zippo in my pocket. With a defiant roar, I flicked it open, sparking the wick to life. The thing flinched back, its eyes squinting against the sudden flare of light. "Here's my answer, you son of a bitch," I snarled. And with that, I touched the flame to the resinous black beads wound into my hair, the ones I had been collecting from the trees of a dozen blighted groves. The beads ignited in a great gush of green flame, fire spreading from my head to the tendrils that gripped me. The thing shrieked as I transformed into a human torch, bathed in venomous flames that ate through its fungal flesh like acid. It flung me away, trailing streamers of fire, as the conflagration raced up the length of its titanic body. The whole vast cavern was lit by the infected blaze, stone walls painted in lurid shades of chartreuse and viridian. Smaller creatures skittered madly in the firelight, a grotesque hellscape exposed. And at the heart of it all, the towering god thing flailed and burned, its shrieks rising to a deafening cacophony. I hit the ground, rolling to extinguish the flames that still clung to me. My hair was a scorched ruin, my skin cracked and blackened, and pain sang along every nerve. But I was alive. Rising shakily to my feet, I retrieved my shotgun and calmly aimed it at the toppling behemoth. The silver flechettes blasted chunk after chunk out of its blazing form, white-hot ichor spraying across the cavern. "Tithes paid, you bastard," I croaked, my voice raw from the smoke. "Now burn." And burn it did, crumbling in on itself like a rotten log, until nothing remained but a great heap of smoldering ash and a few blackened scraps of spongy matter. In the ringing silence that followed, I could feel that some essential balance had shifted, that some great web of power had been ripped asunder. The heart of the darkness had been extinguished, and the forest would sleep easy this night. I let the shotgun slip from my numb fingers and turned to begin the long climb back to the surface. There would be other monsters, other nightmares to confront. That was the burden of the ranger now and forever. But for the first time in a long time, I dared to hope that one day I might find my way back into the light. I emerged from the cave into a world transformed. The trees seemed to stand taller, their leaves a richer shade of green. The air tasted sweet, purged of the cloying rot that had tainted it for so long. Even the sunlight seemed brighter, as if a pall had been lifted from the land. It was over. The dark heart of the Nantahala had been destroyed, its malign power broken. The ancient terror that had haunted these hills had been banished back to the fungal hell that spawned it. The forest was free, but as I stood there blinking in the clean sunlight, I knew my own story was far from over. I had gazed into the abyss, and the abyss had gazed back. I had walked in the shadow for too long, and a part of me would always belong to the darkness. I could feel it, coiled in the depths of my soul, a cold reptilian awareness that could never be fully exorcised. The same occult senses that had guided me in my hunt now whispered of other blighted groves, other haunted wildernesses, where the boundary between worlds wore thin. Places where the monsters walked, and the innocent died weeping in the night. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, find a quiet corner of the world to nurture my scars, and try to forget the horrors I had witnessed. Or I could embrace the curse that had been laid upon me, become the thing that monsters feared lurking in the night. I could sharpen the crueler edges of my nature into a weapon and use it to hold the line against the darkness. In the end, it was no choice at all. This was my war now, for better or worse. I had spilled too much blood, seen too many impossible things to ever truly belong to the daylight world again. The ranger's path was the only one left to me. I didn't know where that path would take me or what fresh nightmares crouched in wait along its length. All I knew for certain was that I would walk it to the end, no matter the cost. Squaring my shoulders, I turned my back on the Nantahala and started walking, into the waiting trees and the untold trials beyond. On my heels, my shadow stretched long and dark, reaching hungrily for the wild places of the world. My name is Ethan Reynolds. I'm not a good man, but I do good things. I walk in the shadow so others don't have to. I am the Ranger, and I am far from finished. The first thing they teach you at Ranger training is that nature doesn't care if you live or die. I learned that lesson long before I ever put on the uniform. My name is Nahili Tapio, and for the past 3 years, I've served as a wilderness ranger in the Monongahela Wilderness Area, one of the most remote regions in the eastern United States. The name Nahili means forest in native Hawaiian, a birthright from my mother's side. Tapio, my chosen surname, comes from the Finnish god of forests and hunting. It felt right when I took the job, a connection to the ancient spirits of these woods that I would soon call home. Most people think being a park ranger is all about telling tourists not to feed the bears and making sure campfires are properly extinguished. But between 2000 and 2010, park rangers were more likely to be assaulted in the line of duty than any other federal officer, including those working for the ATF, Secret Service, and DEA. Add in accidents involving natural disasters, and a ranger can be up to 12 times more likely to die on the job than an FBI agent. What drives someone to choose this life? For me, it began with loss. 5 years ago, my younger brother disappeared while hiking these same mountains. The search lasted 2 weeks. Helicopters scanned from above while ground teams combed through ravines and gullies. I was there every day, pushing deeper into areas the official teams wouldn't go. When they finally called off the search, I stayed. For another month, I lived in these woods, following game trails, sleeping in caves, listening to the whispers of the forest at night. They never found him. Afterward, I couldn't return to my office job in Pittsburgh. Something about the wilderness had gotten under my skin. Not just the grief, but a need to understand this place. As one retired ranger once said, the role of a ranger involves two parallel images: the daring, resourceful rescuer and firefighter next to the interpreter and educator. I wanted to be both, to protect people from the wilderness and to protect the wilderness itself. So I applied to the Ranger Service, completed my training, and requested assignment to Monongahela. I became certified in wilderness emergency medical response, technical rope rescue, and bear management. I learned to read the forest, not just the trails and landmarks, but the subtle signs that tell you when something isn't right. And in these mountains, things often aren't right. My cabin sits on the eastern ridge overlooking Blackwater Lake, a pristine body of water that reflects the sky like a mirror on calm days. It's simple: one bedroom, a small kitchen, bathroom, and a main room with a stone fireplace. Solar panels provide minimal electricity, but I've grown accustomed to living by lantern light when the clouds roll in. The nearest town is Silver Creek, population 867, about 20 miles down a winding mountain road. My Australian friend Kai visits a few times a year. He's an anthropologist studying indigenous cultures worldwide, particularly their relationship with wilderness spaces. My Canadian friends, Emily and Devin, stay at the guest cabin across the lake during summer months. They're wildlife photographers who've published several books on North American forest ecosystems. Tonight, I sit on my porch, watching darkness creep across the lake. A storm is building to the west, not just rain, but something heavier. The kind of atmospheric pressure that makes your ears pop and sets the local wildlife on edge. No birds call, no insects chirp, just the low moan of wind through pine needles. My radio crackles to life. "Ranger Tapio, do you copy?" It's Stella from dispatch, her voice tight with concern. I grab the handset. "Copy, Stella, what's going on?" "We've got hikers missing on the North Ridge Trail. Family of 3. Father, mother, 14-year-old daughter. They were supposed to check in at Pinewood Shelter by sundown. Another hiking group reported they never arrived." I glance at the darkening sky. "Storm's moving in fast. How long have they been overdue?" "About 3 hours now. The father made radio contact around noon when they were at Miller's Crossing. Nothing since." Miller's Crossing to Pinewood Shelter should take 4 hours, 5 at most. If they left at noon and still hadn't arrived, something had delayed them significantly or taken them off trail. "I'll head to Miller's Crossing and work my way toward Pinewood," I say, already moving inside to grab my pack. "Alert search and rescue that we might need additional resources, especially if this storm hits full force." "Already done. Teams on standby, but they can't deploy helicopters in this weather. You're the closest ranger to their last known position." "Roger that. I'll radio once I find something." "Be careful out there, Naheli. Something feels off tonight." I clip the radio to my belt and begin gathering supplies. In these situations, rangers often stay through the night in brutal conditions to help lost hikers, sometimes in temperatures far below zero, struggling to maintain fires with icy branches while waiting for rescue helicopters. My go bag is always ready. First aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification tablets, high-calorie rations, flares, extra batteries, thermal blankets. I add additional medical supplies, a more powerful flashlight, and my satellite phone. After a moment's hesitation, I strap my service pistol to my hip. We don't usually carry firearms on search and rescue operations, but Stella's words echo in my mind. Something feels off tonight. The storm reaches my cabin just as I'm heading out. Rain hammers against the metal roof like thrown gravel. Lightning splits the sky, illuminating the churning surface of the lake below. In that brief flash, I see something that makes me freeze. A figure stands at the lake's edge, impossibly tall and broad-shouldered, too large to be human. Then darkness swallows it again. I switch on my flashlight, sweeping its beam toward the shore, but see nothing except rain-pocked water and swaying pines. A trick of the light, I tell myself. Storm shadows playing on my anxiety. But as I shoulder my pack and step off the porch into the downpour, a sound rises above the wind and rain. A long, mournful howl that is neither wolf nor coyote nor bear. It echoes across the lake, reverberating through the valley, making the hair on my arm stand on end. My brother used to tell stories about the sounds he heard deep in these woods, especially at night. Strange calls that followed him, voices that sounded almost, but not quite, human. I dismissed them as campfire exaggerations. Now I'm not so sure. I check my compass, pull up my hood, and begin walking north. The missing family needs me, and every minute counts. But with each step into the forest, the feeling grows stronger. I'm being watched by something ancient and patient, something that knows these mountains far better than I ever will, something that doesn't want to be found. The North Ridge Trail would typically take me 40 minutes to reach from my cabin. Tonight, fighting against wind-driven rain and navigating by flashlight, it takes over an hour. By the time I reach Miller's Crossing, a wooden bridge spanning a usually gentle creek now transformed into a raging torrent, I'm soaked through despite my weatherproof gear. I sweep my flashlight along the muddy trail, looking for footprints. The rain has washed away most signs, but under the partial shelter of a large hemlock, I spot what I'm looking for. 3 sets of boot prints heading east along the trail, 1 large, presumably the father's, and 2 smaller sets. They're several hours old, but they confirm the family at least made it this far. I follow the trail, moving as quickly as safety allows. Every quarter mile I stop to call out, "Hello, Forest Service, can anyone hear me?" Only the wind answers. 2 miles past the crossing, the trail forks. The left path continues toward Pinewood Shelter, the family's intended destination. The right branch descends into Whispering Valley, a densely forested area popular with wildlife enthusiasts, but considered too rugged for casual hikers, especially families with children. I pause, shining my light down both paths. The rain has let up slightly, and I can make out fresh tracks in the mud, heading right toward the valley. Why would they leave the main trail, especially with a storm approaching? I radio dispatch. "Stella, I've tracked the missing hikers to the North Ridge Fork. They've deviated from their route and headed into Whispering Valley." The radio crackles with static before Stella's voice breaks through. "Confirm they went into the valley? That doesn't make sense with their experience level. Tracks are clear. 3 sets of boots, right-size distribution for the family. I'm following them in. Use extreme caution. That area has had several incidents this season." She doesn't elaborate, but she doesn't need to. We both know what she means. 3 hikers have reported strange encounters in Whispering Valley since early spring. Unusual sounds, sensation of being followed, and in one case, a campsite that had been completely destroyed while the hiker was on a day trek. The official reports blamed black bears, but the descriptions didn't quite fit. I've avoided patrolling that section at night, until now. The valley trail descends sharply, switching back through stands of ancient oak and maple. The trees here are older, their trunks massive and gnarled with age. Even in daylight, little sunlight reaches the forest floor. Now, in the storm-dark night, my flashlight beam seems swallowed by the pressing darkness. A mile down the trail, I find the first sign that something's wrong. A child's pink water bottle lying on its side, half buried in mud. Next to it, the trail shows signs of a scuffle, footprints overlapping chaotically, a deeper impression where someone might have fallen. I crouch down, examining the scene carefully. No blood, which is good, but the footprints leaving the area are different, deeper, more spaced out, as if they were running. Something had frightened them badly enough to flee. I stand and sweep my light in a wide arc through the trees. That's when I see it. About 20 yards off trail, a backpack hanging from a low branch. It sways slightly in the wind, as if recently placed there. Moving carefully through the underbrush, I approach the pack. It's a man's hiking backpack, blue with black trim. good quality. I check the outer pockets and find a wallet. The driver's license confirms it belongs to Michael Chen, the father of the missing family. Why would he leave his pack hanging in a tree? An old woodcraft technique flashes through my mind. Hanging packs to keep them from bears. But you'd typically use a much higher branch. And you'd hang all your packs together, not just one. Unless he was leaving it as a marker, a sign for rescuers to find. I scan the area beyond the backpack and spot broken branches and disturbed ground heading east, away from the trail. They were moving cross-country now, no longer following any path. As I prepare to follow, my radio emits a burst of static that makes me jump. Through the white noise, I hear fragments of Stella's voice. Additional reports. Same area. Be advised. Then nothing but crackling interference. I try to respond, but the signal is gone. The valley's known for dead zones, places where the steep terrain blocks radio transmission. I'm on my own until I can get back to higher ground. Taking a deep breath, I continue in the direction of the broken branches. The rain has almost stopped, but water still drips from the canopy above, creating a constant patter that masks other sounds. The air feels heavy with moisture and something else, a musky, animalistic scent that grows stronger as I move deeper into the untracked forest. After 20 minutes of careful progress, I hear it, a child's whimper, barely audible, coming from a dense thicket ahead. "Hello?" I call softly. "I'm Ranger Tapio with the Forest Service. I'm here to help." Silence, then a whispered voice. "Is it gone?" I move forward slowly, keeping my light low. "Who's there? Are you hurt?" A girl's face appears between branches, the missing 14-year-old, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispers. "It might hear you." "What might hear me?" I ask, kneeling to her level. "Where are your parents?" She points a trembling finger deeper into the woods. "It took them, the tall man, the one that isn't a man." A chill runs through me that has nothing to do with my wet clothes. "What do you mean? What did it look like?" "Like shadow standing up, huge, covered in hair." Her voice breaks. "It smelled like rotten leaves and wet dog. It made noises. Not talking, but not animal sounds either." I recognize the description immediately. It matches dozens of accounts I've read. Stories told by hikers, hunters, and even other rangers. Stories most of us dismiss as campfire tales or misidentifications of bears. Bigfoot. I've never been a believer. In 3 years of ranging these mountains, I've never seen evidence that convinced me such a creature exists. But the terror in this girl's eyes is real, and something took her parents. "What's your name?" I ask gently. "Madison." "Madison, I'm going to get you out of here safely. Then we'll find your parents. Can you walk?" She nods, crawling out from the thicket. Her clothes are torn and muddy, but she appears uninjured. "It happened so fast," she says, as I help her to her feet. "We got lost in the storm, and Dad thought he saw a cabin light through the trees. We went toward it, but then it was gone. That's when we heard the screaming." Screaming? Like nothing I've ever heard before. Dad told us to run back to the trail, but we got separated in the rain. Then I saw it, coming through the trees. It grabbed Mom first, then went after Dad when he tried to help her. He yelled at me to hide. I hand Madison a thermal blanket from my pack and give her some water. "Which direction did it take them?" She points northeast, toward the area locals call the Dark Hollows, a section of old-growth forest that's never been logged, where the trees grow so densely that their canopies create perpetual twilight below. I've been in those hollows during daylight hours and found them disorienting. At night in a storm, they would be nearly impossible to navigate without expert knowledge of the terrain. Knowledge that whatever took her parents seems to possess. I check my watch. It's past midnight now. The storm has moved on, but a heavy mist clings to the forest floor, obscuring anything more than 10 feet away. Search and rescue won't be able to deploy until dawn at the earliest. "Madison, I need to get you to safety first. Then I can come back with a team to find your parents." She grabs my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "No, it'll be too late. It was dragging them away. It's going to—" She can't finish the sentence. I face an impossible choice. Follow protocol and escort the girl to safety, potentially abandoning her parents to whatever fate awaits them, or track this creature into one of the most dangerous sections of the wilderness at night with a traumatized teenager in tow. In my 3 years as a ranger, I've broken protocol exactly twice. Both times involved immediate life-threatening situations. Both times I was reprimanded afterward, but people lived who might otherwise have died. Okay, I say finally. We'll look for them together, but you have to stay right with me and do exactly what I say. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Madison nods, determination replacing some of the fear in her eyes. I try the radio once more, but still get nothing but static. I send a text message through my satellite phone, giving dispatch our approximate position and intentions. Whether it goes through is anyone's guess. Satellite coverage in these valleys is spotty at best. Then we begin moving northeast, toward the dark hollows, following a trail of broken vegetation and disturbed ground that suggests something large passed this way, dragging heavy objects behind it. The mist grows thicker as we progress, turning the beam of my flashlight into a diffuse glow that illuminates a little. Sounds seem muffled and distorted, the drip of water from leaves, the occasional rustle of nighttime creatures, our own footsteps. Madison stays close behind me, her breathing quick but controlled. For a 14-year-old who just witnessed something traumatic, she's holding up remarkably well. Have you heard stories about the tall man before? I ask quietly as we walk. My dad said they were just legends, she replies. Native American myths about forest spirits or something. He didn't believe in any of it. I nod. The local indigenous tribes have stories about forest beings, not malevolent creatures, but powerful spirits who protect the wilderness from human intrusion. They're known by different names depending on the tribe. Sasquatch from the Salish Sasquatch, Wetiko or Wendigo, to the Algonquin. Some tribes believe they appear as messengers of warning, telling humans to change their ways. But there's a difference between cultural mythology and what Madison described, a flesh and blood creature that attacked her family. We've been walking for about 15 minutes when the ground begins to slope downward. The trees loom larger here, ancient sentinels that have stood for centuries. The underbrush thins, replaced by a carpet of moss and ferns that muffles our footsteps. Madison suddenly grabs my arm, stopping me. Listen, she whispers. I hold my breath and strain my ears. At first, I hear nothing unusual, just the ambient sounds of the nocturnal forest. Then it comes, so faint I almost miss it. A low, rhythmic sound like drumming or thumping coming from somewhere ahead. What is that? Madison asks. I don't know, I admit, but it's the direction the trail leads. We move forward more cautiously now. The mist swirls around our legs, and the drumming grows marginally louder. It has an irregular pattern, not mechanical but not random either. Almost like heartbeats. The trail of broken vegetation ends at the mouth of a ravine. The walls rise 30 feet on either side, creating a natural channel that funnels the mist into an opaque wall ahead of us. The drumming emanates from somewhere beyond that wall. I hesitate. Every instinct tells me not to enter that ravine. It's a natural trap. Limited visibility, difficult terrain, few escape routes if something goes wrong. My parents are in there, Madison says, reading my hesitation. I can feel it. Before I can respond, a scream pierces the night. Human, terrified, and quickly cut short. It came from inside the ravine. Madison bolts forward before I can stop her, disappearing into the mist. Madison, wait, I call, racing after her. The ravine floor is treacherous, slick rock and exposed roots that threaten to twist an ankle with every step. I move as quickly as I dare, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly as I try to catch sight of Madison ahead. The mist parts occasionally, giving me glimpses of the path ahead, but no sign of the girl. The walls of the ravine narrow as I progress, the drumming growing louder, more insistent. It seems to come from all directions now, as if the sound is bouncing off the rock walls around me. Then, abruptly, the ravine ends in a circular clearing about 50 feet across. The mist is thinner here, and my flashlight illuminates a scene from a nightmare. At the center of the clearing stands an enormous figure, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. Its back is to me, and it's hunched over something on the ground, something that moves weakly. Madison crouches behind a boulder at the edge of the clearing, frozen in place, watching the scene before her. I should call out, fire a warning shot, do something to scare the creature away. But my voice dies in my throat, and my hands refuse to move toward my weapon. An irrational, primal fear holds me rooted to the spot. The instinctive recognition of an apex predator. The creature straightens suddenly, its massive head turning slightly. It sniffs the air, then emits a low, rumbling growl that seems to vibrate through the ground beneath my feet. It knows we're here. In that moment, the choices narrow to one: protect the child. I rush forward, grabbing Madison and pulling her back into the ravine, away from the clearing. She struggles against me, crying out for her parents, but I don't stop. If that thing decides to charge, our only hope is to reach narrower confines, where its size might work against it. Behind us, the growl changes to a roar, a sound so powerful and alien that it seems to bypass my ears and vibrate directly through my bones. Then comes the impact of heavy footsteps, gaining speed, coming our way. "Run!" I shout, pushing Madison ahead of me. "Don't look back!" We sprint through the ravine, slipping on wet stone, crashing through underbrush. The creature follows, its footfalls shaking the ground. It's impossibly fast for something so large, closing the distance with each stride. 50 yards from the ravine entrance, my flashlight catches a narrow crevice in the wall to our right, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Without hesitation, I grab Madison and push her toward it. "Get in! Go as deep as you can!" She doesn't argue, wiggling into the tight space. I follow immediately after, scraping my shoulders against the rough stone as I force myself inside. The crevice extends back about 10 feet before opening slightly into a small hollow in the ravine wall. Not a true cave, but enough space for us to huddle together out of immediate reach. Not a moment too soon. A massive shape blots out the faint light at the crevice entrance. The creature paces back and forth, occasionally pressing against the opening, testing if it can reach us. Its breathing is heavy and wet-sounding. The smell is overwhelming, musky and primal, like wet fur and decay. For what feels like hours, we remain frozen in our stone refuge while the creature tries to reach us. Sometimes it retreats, only to return with renewed determination. It makes a series of vocalizations, grunts, howls, and occasionally sounds disturbingly close to words, though in no language I recognize. Madison trembles against me, her face buried against my jacket to muffle her sobs. I keep my arm around her shoulders, my other hand on my pistol, though I doubt it would do much against the mass of the thing outside. "What about my parents?" she whispers eventually. "We'll find them," I promise, with more confidence than I feel. But we need to stay alive to do that. Sometime near dawn, the sounds outside change. The creature's movements become more agitated, and its vocalizations shift to a higher pitch. Then abruptly, it's gone, the heavy footsteps receding rapidly down the ravine. I wait another 20 minutes before daring to look outside. The eastern sky has lightened to a deep blue, pushing back the darkness. The ravine is empty. "Stay here," I tell Madison. "I'm going to check if it's safe." I ease out of the crevice, weapon drawn, scanning the area. The morning mist still clings to the ground, but visibility is much better than during the night. There's no sign of the creature, but the ground tells a story. Massive footprints pressed deep into the mud, broken branches, and drag marks leading back toward the clearing. My radio suddenly crackles to life, making me jump. "Ranger Tapio, do you copy? This is Search and Rescue Bravo team responding to your last known coordinates." Relief floods through me as I respond. "Copy, Bravo team. I have one survivor with me, juvenile female. Parents still missing. We've encountered a situation. Requesting immediate extraction and additional personnel. Roger that. Helicopter is en route to the coordinates you're transmitting. ETA 15 minutes. Can you move to a clearing for pickup?" I look back toward the ravine entrance, calculating distances and terrain. "Affirmative. We'll move to the extraction point." I help Madison from the crevice, noting the exhaustion in her face. "Help is coming," I tell her. "We need to move to open ground for pickup." "But my parents?" "The rescue team will help us find them. Right now, we need to get you to safety." She nods reluctantly, and we begin making our way out of the ravine. As we emerge into the broader forest, the morning light filters through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The forest feels different in daylight, less threatening, more familiar, but I can't shake the feeling that we're still being watched. Occasionally, I catch movement from the corner of my eye, only to find nothing when I turn to look. Madison notices it too, pressing closer to me as we walk. "It's still out there," she whispers. "We're almost out," I assure her. "Just a little further." We reach a small clearing about a quarter mile from the ravine, barely large enough for a helicopter to land, but it will have to do. I radio our position and receive confirmation that the chopper is 5 minutes out. As we wait, Madison suddenly stiffens beside me, her eyes fixed on the tree line to our north. "What's wrong?" I ask, following her gaze. "I saw it," she breathes. "Just for a second. It's watching us." I scan the dense forest edge but see nothing unusual. No movement, no massive shape among the trees. But the feeling of being observed intensifies, raising goosebumps along my arms. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors breaks the tension. The sound grows rapidly louder as the rescue chopper approaches, hovering over the clearing before settling gently onto the ground. 2 rescue personnel jump out, rushing toward us while the pilot keeps the rotors spinning. "Are you hurt?" one of them shouts over the noise. "We're okay," I call back. "But there are 2 more people missing, her parents. They were taken last night by—" I hesitate, not sure how to describe what we encountered. "By what?" the rescuer asks. Madison answers before I can, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "By a monster." "But no one's going to believe us, are they?" The rescuer exchanges a glance with his partner, then looks back at me with an expression I can't quite read. "You'd be surprised," he says finally. "This isn't the first call like this we've had this season." As they usher us toward the helicopter, I glance back at the forest one last time. Perhaps it's a trick of light and shadow, or perhaps my mind is creating patterns where none exist. But I swear I see a massive dark figure standing among the distant trees, watching us depart. Then the shape steps backward, melting into the forest like it was never there at all. The helicopter lifts off, carrying us away from the wilderness and back to civilization. But as we rise above the canopy, I know with certainty that I'll be returning to those dark hollows. Madison's parents are still out there, and whatever took them, whether beast or myth or something in between, is still out there too, and now it knows my face. 3 days after the rescue, I sit in the Silver Creek Ranger Station office, staring at my computer screen. The search for Madison's parents, Michael and Jennifer Chen, continues, but hope dwindles with each passing day. 5 search teams have combed the dark hollows and surrounding areas. Thermal imaging drones have scanned every ravine and gully. Cadaver dogs have followed countless trails that ultimately lead nowhere. The official report sits incomplete before me, cursor blinking at the end of a sentence I can't seem to finish. The cause of the Chen family separation appears to be— What do I write? That a creature science says doesn't exist attacked them and dragged 2 adults into the wilderness? That the Bigfoot of campfire stories is real and hunting humans in my jurisdiction? I bang out, undetermined, and submit the form. It's the coward's way out. But I've learned that some truths aren't meant for official channels. Madison has been staying with her aunt in Pittsburgh. The trauma specialists say she's handling things as well as can be expected, but she refuses to change her story. In every interview, she describes the same creature, 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moving with incredible speed and strength. Her consistency is remarkable for someone her age, which makes her account all the more disturbing. The door to the office swings open, and Ranger Director Colin Blackwood enters. He's been with the service for 30 years and runs the Eastern District with military precision. "Tapio," he says by way of greeting. "Got a minute?" I nod, gesturing to the chair opposite my desk. He sits, placing a thick manila folder between us. "You did good work getting the Chen girl out safely," he begins. "Not many rangers would have pursued into that terrain at night, especially with a storm moving through. Thank you, sir. I just wish we'd found her parents." He taps the folder. "That's what I want to discuss. This isn't the first incident in that area, not by a long shot." He opens the folder to reveal dozens of reports spanning decades. Missing hikers, destroyed campsites, unexplained sounds, and strange tracks. Many include the same details. Unusual howls, strong musky odors, feelings of being watched, and in some cases, glimpses of large, hair-covered figures moving through the trees. We don't typically share this information outside the senior ranger staff, Blackwood explains. Too much risk of panic, tourism impact, and frankly, ridicule from the scientific community. But given what you experienced, I think you need to be aware of the pattern. I flipped through the reports, recognizing locations throughout the Monongahela wilderness. Many cluster around the Dark Hollows and Whispering Valley. How long has this been happening? I asked. First recorded incident was in 1879. Lumber surveyor disappeared near what we now call Whispering Valley. His journal was found a year later with entries describing moving trees that followed his camp at night. I think about what I saw in the ravine, the massive figure hunched over something on the ground. You believe these reports? That there's something out there? Blackwood leans back, rubbing his weathered face. What I believe doesn't matter. The data shows a recurring pattern of incidents that conventional explanations don't adequately address. Whether it's an undocumented species, a psychological response to wilderness isolation, or something else entirely, I can't say. But I do know this. Whatever it is, it's becoming more active. He turns to the most recent reports. 17 incidents in the past year alone. That's triple our historical average. Why? That's what I want you to find out. He slides a key across the desk. This opens a storage unit in the basement. It contains additional files too sensitive for the main archive, plus physical evidence collected over the years. I'm assigning you as lead investigator on these cases, effective immediately. I stare at the key. Sir, with all due respect, I'm not qualified for this. I'm a wilderness ranger, not a cryptozoologist. You're exactly what we need. Someone who's seen it firsthand, but still maintains analytical thinking. Someone who knows these mountains and can separate facts from folklore. He stands, heading for the door. Besides, you were going to investigate anyway, weren't you? At least this way, you'll have resources and authority. He's right. I haven't been able to think about anything else since that night in the ravine. What about my regular duties? I ask. Consider them reduced for now. Focus on this. Find answers. He pauses at the door. And Tapio, be careful. Whatever's out there, it's survived this long by staying hidden. It won't appreciate your attention. After Blackwood leaves, I sit for a long moment, considering the implications of what I've just learned. The agency has been tracking these incidents for over a century, but keeping them compartmentalized. How many rangers before me have faced what I saw in those woods? I take the elevator to the basement level. A fluorescent-lit concrete expanse filled with maintenance equipment and archived records. The storage unit is in the far corner, separated from the main area by a chain-link fence. The key turns smoothly in the padlock. Inside, metal shelving units line the walls, packed with boxes labeled by date and location. A large table dominates the center, currently empty except for a folder marked Current Investigation, Chen Disappearance. I open it to find photos from the ravine where we encountered the creature, close-ups of the massive footprints, broken vegetation, and something I hadn't noticed in the darkness. Long, coarse hairs caught on tree bark about 7 feet above the ground. According to the attached lab report, the hairs belong to no known species. A map on the wall shows the Monongahela wilderness with red pins marking incident locations. They form a clear pattern, a rough circle with the Dark Hollows at its center. My cabin sits at the southern edge of this circle. As I examine the evidence, my phone buzzes. It's Kai, my Australian friend, responding to a message I'd sent asking about indigenous legends of forest creatures. Found some interesting connections. Flying in tomorrow, much to discuss. I'm about to reply when my radio crackles. Dispatch calling all available rangers to assist with a lost hiker near Timber Ridge, miles from my current investigation area. For a moment, I consider ignoring it, but duty wins out. The mysteries of the Dark Hollows have waited this long. They can wait a few more hours. By the time I return to my cabin that evening, the sun has already disappeared behind the western mountains. The lost hiker, a college student, who had underestimated both the terrain and his own abilities, is safely back with his friends, suffering nothing worse than a sprained ankle and wounded pride. As I pull up to my cabin, headlights illuminating the weathered porch, I notice something immediately wrong. The front door stands slightly ajar, moving gently in the evening breeze. I always lock up when I leave, even for short periods. Drawing my sidearm, I approach cautiously. No lights shine from within, but as I reach the porch steps, a powerful odor hits me. The same musky animal smell I encountered in the ravine. My hand trembles slightly as I push the door fully open, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. The main room has been ransacked, furniture overturned, cabinets emptied onto the floor, books pulled from shelves. But it's not the destruction that stops me cold. It's the message scratched deep into my wooden dining table. Leave them alone. 3 simple words, carved with something sharp and powerful enough to gouge nearly half an inch into solid oak. Below the words is a crude symbol, what appears to be a footprint with 5 toes. I back out of the cabin, sweeping my light and weapon in a wide arc around the property. Nothing moves in the surrounding forest, but the feeling of being watched is overwhelming. I retreat to my vehicle and radio for backup, reporting a break-in at my location. While waiting, I circle the cabin, maintaining a safe distance. The evidence is unmistakable. Massive footprints in the soft earth around my home, some measuring nearly 18 inches in length. Broken branches on trees where something large pushed through. Deep scratches on the cabin's exterior walls. A patrol car arrives 20 minutes later. Deputy Rivera from the county sheriff's office, who handles law enforcement for the more remote areas around Silver Creek. "Jesus, Tapio," he says after surveying the scene. "What the hell happened here?" "I'm not sure," I lie. "I was responding to a rescue call. Came back to find this." He crouches to examine one of the footprints, his flashlight highlighting its enormous size. Bear, maybe? Though I've never seen one do this kind of targeted damage. "Maybe," I say, not wanting to voice the alternative. Rivera takes photos and collects what little evidence there is, but we both know this won't lead to an arrest. There are no fingerprints, no DNA beyond the unidentifiable hairs, no suspects that would make sense in an official report. After he leaves, I don't go back inside. Instead, I drive to the small motel in Silver Creek and check into a room for the night. As I lie on the lumpy mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I replay the warning carved into my table. Leave them alone. Not just leave, but leave them alone. The Chens, the creature or creatures, doesn't want me looking for the missing couple, which means they might still be alive. Sleep eludes me that night, my mind churning with possibilities, none of them comforting. Kai arrives the following afternoon, his lanky frame folded awkwardly into the passenger seat of my vehicle as we drive back to the ranger station. I've told him everything. The encounter in the ravine, the evidence in the basement storage, and now the warning in my cabin. Unlike most people, Kai doesn't dismiss my account or suggest psychological explanations. As an anthropologist specializing in indigenous cultures, he's encountered too many consistent stories across different civilizations to dismiss them all as mere myth. "The interesting thing," he says as we pull into the station parking lot, "is how similar the descriptions are across completely unconnected cultures. The Pacific Northwest tribes have Sasquatch. The Himalayan peoples have Yeti. Australia's Aboriginal peoples speak of the Yowie, different names, but remarkably consistent physical descriptions and behaviors." "That still doesn't tell me what I'm dealing with," I point out. "No, but it suggests something real as the common source of these legends, something that's managed to remain largely hidden despite human expansion." He pauses. "There's something else you should know. Many indigenous stories describe these beings as highly intelligent, with their own language and social structures. Not just animals, but a different kind of people." The thought sends a chill through me. If these creatures possess human-like intelligence, that changes everything about how I approach this investigation, and how dangerous it might be. In the basement storage unit, Kai moves methodically through the archived materials while I organize the current evidence. His academic training gives him insights I might miss, recognizing patterns and connections across disparate reports. "Look at this," he says after an hour of research, pointing to a series of incident reports from the 1940s. There was a major logging operation planned for the Dark Hollows area. 3 survey teams were sent in. All experienced mysterious accidents, equipment failures, injuries, disappearances. The project was eventually abandoned. You think these creatures were protecting their territory? Kai nods. It's a consistent pattern. Whenever human activity threatens to encroach significantly on the core territory, incidents increase. It's not random aggression, it's defensive. I think about Madison's family, who were simply hiking on established trails. That doesn't explain the Chens. No, Kai admits. That's an escalation. Something has changed the normal behavioral patterns. We spend the rest of the day compiling a timeline of incidents, mapping them against human activities in the region. By evening, a disturbing picture emerges. Incidents have increased dramatically since the state approved preliminary surveys for a potential resort development near Blackwater Lake, less than 5 miles from the Dark Hollows. That has to be it, I say, circling the proposed development site on our map. They're reacting to the threat of major construction in their territory. It's possible, Kai agrees, but it doesn't explain why they'd take 2 adults hostage instead of simply frightening them away. My phone rings. Madison's aunt calling with unexpected news. Madison insists she needs to speak with you, she tells me. She says she remembered something important. 20 minutes later, I'm on a video call with Madison, her pale face framed by the hospital room behind her. She's been readmitted for observation after experiencing what doctors called stress-induced seizures. I remember what it said, she tells me without preamble. The creature, when it took my parents. It made sounds like talking but not really words. Except once it said something I understood. What did it say, Madison? Trade. Her voice drops to a whisper. It said trade. Then it looked right at me before it took them away. After ending the call, I sit in stunned silence. Kai watches me, waiting. It spoke, I finally say. The creature said trade when it took the Chens. Trade, Kai repeats thoughtfully. Trading the parents for what? The answer hits me with sudden clarity. For their territory, the resort development. It would destroy acres of forest right in their home range. You think they're holding hostages to stop construction? Kai sounds skeptical. That's remarkably sophisticated thinking. If they're as intelligent as the legends suggest, why not? They've tried scaring people away for decades. Maybe they've learned it's not enough. It sounds absurd when spoken aloud. Cryptid creatures kidnapping humans as leverage against development. Yet the evidence points to something far more complex than an animal protecting its territory. We need to get back into those woods, I say. If the Chens are still alive, they're somewhere in the Dark Hollows. Kai nods slowly. I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous. You're not trained for this kind of operation. You need someone who understands what you might be communicating with, he insists. Besides, I've done field work in some of the most remote places on Earth. I can handle myself. I want to argue further, but he's right. If these creatures are truly intelligent, approaching them with empathy and understanding might be more effective than weapons and tracking equipment. We spend the next day preparing. I requisition additional gear from the ranger station, enhanced communications equipment, thermal imaging devices, extended survival supplies. Officially, I log it as preparation for an extended search operation for the Chen family. Kai contacts colleagues in the anthropology department at Carnegie Mellon, gathering any information that might help us communicate with or understand non-human intelligence. It's fringe research, speculative at best, but we need every advantage. By the second morning, we're ready. I leave a sealed envelope with Ranger Director Blackwood, containing all our research and theories, with instructions to open it if we don't return in 3 days. As we load the last supplies into my vehicle, Blackwood approaches, concern evident in his weathered face. You're going after them, aren't you? He asks quietly. The Chen family. We have new information, I say, not quite answering his question, something that might help locate them. He studies me for a long moment. Tapio, in 30 years, I've never seen anyone who encountered these things close up come back unchanged. Be careful what you discover out there. What do you mean? He looks toward the distant mountains, their peaks obscured by morning mist. Some knowledge changes how you see the world, forever. He hands me a small device, a locator beacon of military grade. If things go sideways, activate this. We'll come for you, no questions asked. I pocket the beacon, thanking him with a nod. An hour later, Kai and I are hiking up the North Ridge Trail. Despite the bright autumn day, few other hikers are about. The recent disappearances have made people nervous about venturing too far into the wilderness. We bypass the main trail junction, taking the path into Whispering Valley once again. The forest feels different in daylight, less menacing, but no less watchful. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig draws our attention. "We're being observed," Kai says softly as we approach the ravine where Madison and I encountered the creature. "Have been since we entered the valley." I nod, having felt the same sensation, eyes following our progress, always just beyond the range of perception. At the ravine entrance, we pause to arrange our equipment. The plan is to proceed to the clearing where I last saw the Chens, then attempt to establish peaceful contact using methods Kai has developed based on primate communication studies. "If these beings are territorial but intelligent," he explains, "approaching with clear, non-threatening signals is essential. No weapons visible, controlled movements, and consistent vocal tones. And if they're not interested in peaceful contact," he pats his pocket, "then we use your director's panic button and hope they're slower than your rescue teams." We enter the ravine cautiously, moving at a deliberate pace that allows any observers to clearly see our intentions. Kai occasionally makes a low melodic sound, a vocalization he believes communicates peaceful intent across multiple primate species. The ravine opens to the same clearing where I saw the creature days earlier. In daylight, details emerge that darkness had hidden. A circle of stones at the center, arranged too precisely to be natural. The ground around it shows signs of regular use, packed earth, lack of undergrowth, small objects placed in apparent patterns. "This is a gathering place," Kai whispers, excitement overriding caution. "These are deliberate arrangements, symbolic communication." Before I can respond, a sound freezes us both. The snap of a heavy branch from the far side of the clearing. We turn slowly to see a massive figure emerge from the tree line. It stands upright on two legs, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark brown hair. The face is the most startling feature, a blend of ape-like characteristics with an unsettlingly human-like expression of intelligence. Deep-set eyes observe us with unmistakable awareness and calculation. Kai begins his vocalization, soft, rhythmic sounds that rise and fall in a pattern. The creature tilts its head, listening. Then, to my astonishment, it responds, not with words, but with a similar pattern of sounds, deeper and more resonant. "It's working," Kai breathes. "It's establishing communication." The creature takes a step forward, then another. Despite my racing heart, I hold my ground. It approaches until it stands barely 10 feet away, close enough that I can smell its musky odor and hear its deep, rhythmic breathing. Then it makes a gesture, arm extended, palm up, fingers curled inward. "It wants us to follow," Kai translates. Against every instinct for self-preservation, we follow as the creature turns and moves into the forest beyond the clearing. It travels with surprising grace for its size, navigating the dense undergrowth without disturbing more than necessary. After 20 minutes of steep climbing, we emerge into another clearing, this one larger and clearly modified. Fallen logs arranged as seating, a crude shelter of branches and hides against one rock face, and most shocking of all, other creatures moving about the space. I count 5 individuals of varying sizes. 2 appear to be juveniles, their movements more energetic and curious as they observe us from behind larger adults. The group has the demeanor of a clan or family unit, with clear social dynamics visible in their positioning and interactions. And then I see them, Michael and Jennifer Chen, sitting against the rock face. They're alive, though disheveled and clearly frightened. Jennifer has a crude bandage around her leg, suggesting an injury, but otherwise they appear unharmed. "Oh my God," I whisper, "they're alive." The largest creature, clearly the leader of the group, gestures toward the Chens, then makes a sweeping motion toward the south, in the direction of the proposed resort development. It repeats one vocalization several times, which even to my untrained ear sounds remarkably like trade. Kai steps forward, making careful gestures as he vocalizes in response. The creatures watch him intently, occasionally exchanging sounds among themselves. It's clear they're discussing his communication. "What are you telling them?" I ask quietly. That we understand their concern about the development, Kai explains. That holding humans won't help their cause. It will bring more humans with weapons. I'm suggesting an alternative approach. The leader steps closer to Kai, making a series of complex sounds and gestures. Kai responds in kind, the exchange continuing for several minutes while I stand transfixed by the impossible conversation unfolding before me. Finally, Kai turns to me, his expression serious. They're willing to release the Chens on one condition, that we help protect their territory from destruction. They've watched us enough to know you have authority among humans. They want your promise. The absurdity of the situation nearly overwhelms me, negotiating with creatures that officially don't exist to prevent a development project I have no actual control over. Yet the intelligence in the leader's eyes is unmistakable. This is no animal acting on instinct, but a thinking being fighting for its home. Tell them I promise to do everything in my power, I say. But I need to explain how human systems work. It may take time and different approaches. Kai translates my response. The leader watches me intently, as if judging my sincerity directly rather than relying on the words. Finally, it makes a decisive gesture toward the Chens. Two of the smaller creatures help Jennifer to her feet, supporting her as she limps forward. Michael follows, his eyes wide with disbelief, as he looks between us and the creatures that have held them captive. Are you really talking to them? He asks Kai. What are they? Later, I tell him, moving to help support Jennifer. Right now, we need to get you both out of here safely. The leader makes one final vocalization, longer and more complex than before. Kai listens intently, then translates. They say they've lived in these mountains since before humans built their first fires here. They don't want war, but they will defend what's theirs. We have one changing of the seasons to show progress, or they will find other ways to protect their territory. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, I say, helping the Chens toward the path back to the ravine. As we depart, I glance back once more at the gathering of creatures, beings that have managed to exist alongside humanity for millennia without being definitively discovered. Their eyes reflect an ancient wisdom and patience that humbles me. Whatever they are, undocumented species, evolutionary offshoot, or something else entirely, they deserve the right to exist undisturbed in their forest home. The journey back is arduous, particularly with Jennifer's injured leg, but we make steady progress. By sunset, we reach the North Ridge Trail, where I'm able to radio for emergency extraction. Within an hour, a rescue team arrives to transport the Chens to medical care. As they're loaded into the rescue vehicle, Madison's parents grasp my hands with surprising strength. Nobody will believe what happened to us, Jennifer says, her voice hoarse from days in the wilderness. They'll say we got lost, injured, confused. I know, I tell her, but I believe you, and I made a promise up there that I intend to keep. After the Chens depart, Kai and I are left staring into the darkening forest, the enormity of our discovery settling over us like a physical weight. What now? He asks. Now we find a way to stop that resort development without revealing what's really living in these mountains. And if we can't, I think about the leader's final message, the one-season timeline, the implied threat if we fail. Then we're going to have a much bigger problem than missing hikers. That night, as we camp at the ranger station before beginning our campaign to protect the Dark Hollows, I record everything in my personal journal. Not the sanitized version that will appear in official reports, but the full, unvarnished truth of what we encountered. Future rangers will need this knowledge if they're to understand what watches from the ancient pines of Monongahela. What has always been watching, long before we arrived with our trails and cabins and development plans. What will continue watching long after we're gone. The wilderness has guardians older and more formidable than any human ranger. I merely serve alongside them, even if most of humanity will never know they exist. And as I write these final words, I swear I can hear them in the distance, not threatening, but reminding. A long, mournful call that echoes across the valley, telling those who know how to listen, we are still here. We have always been here. This is our home too. The truth is out there in the whispers of the ancient pines. Whether you choose to believe it or not, I know what watches from the wilderness, and now So do you. My name is Dakota, which means friend to everyone in Sioux. Ironic now, considering how I've come to fear the shadows beyond my cabin window. Before taking this job, I never imagined myself isolating in the remote wilderness of Olympic National Park. The dense primeval forests of Washington state held little appeal for a city kid who grew up surrounded by concrete and neon. But after hitting rock bottom with a failed business and a broken engagement, the Forest Service job posting seemed like a cosmic sign. Park Ranger, Backcountry Division, Olympic National Park. Requires wilderness experience, first aid certification, and strong survival skills. I had precisely none of those qualifications. But desperation makes liars of us all. My interview with Regional Director Kavanaugh was a masterclass in creative biography. I fabricated camping trips, invented survival courses, and conjured a passion for wildlife conservation that existed only in my imagination. Whatever guilt I felt dissolved when her email arrived. Welcome to the Forest Service family. The email mentioned a 6-month assignment at Rainwater Station, a remote outpost nestled against Wapiti Lake, servicing the most isolated segment of the park. The station consisted of a rustic cabin, a small storage shed, and a dock extending into the cold, clear water. My duties would include trail maintenance, wildlife monitoring, and assisting lost hikers who ventured too far into the backcountry. You'll love it, assured Mason, the grizzled veteran ranger who drove me to the cabin on that first day. His weathered face creased into a smile beneath his gray beard. Nothing but trees, mountains, and sky for 30 miles in every direction. As we bumped along the dirt access road, I felt a mounting sense of dread. What had I gotten myself into? The dense forest pressed in from both sides, ancient trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. Mason must have noticed my expression. Don't worry, most folks get spooked their first few weeks. The silence does things to your mind, makes you hear things that aren't there. What kind of things? I asked. Mason's eyes flickered toward me, then back to the road. Just things. Wind in the trees. Animals moving around at night. But there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't telling me everything. The cabin appeared around a bend, a sturdy log structure with a metal roof and a covered porch. Solar panels glinted on the south-facing side, and a small satellite dish perched near the chimney. Beyond the cabin, Wapiti Lake stretched into the distance, its surface mirroring the surrounding mountains. Home sweet home, Mason announced, killing the engine, at least for the next 6 months. That night, after Mason left, I sat on the porch, watching darkness swallow the forest. The immensity of the silence was overwhelming. No traffic noise, no hum of electricity, no distant conversations. Just the occasional call of an owl and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I was unpacking my supplies when I found a leather-bound journal tucked between the guidebooks on the shelf. Opening it, I discovered it belonged to the previous ranger, Jenna Alvarez. Her neat handwriting filled dozens of pages with observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and trail conditions. But as I flipped through the journal, the entries took a strange turn. March 15th. Heard it again last night. That sound isn't a wolf or a bear. It's something else. Something watching the cabin. March 20th. Footprints by the Eastern Trail, much too large for a human. Stride length impossible for any known animal in the region. March 28th. It's getting closer. I've started keeping the shutters closed at night. The final entry was dated April 3rd, just 3 weeks before my arrival. It knows I'm alone here. I've requested transfer to another station. If anyone reads this, don't go into the forest after dark, and whatever you do, don't answer if something calls your name. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the journal and looked around the suddenly claustrophobic cabin. What had happened to Jenna? Mason hadn't mentioned anything about the previous ranger having problems. That's when I heard it. A long, low moan from somewhere in the forest. Not quite animal, not quite human. It rose and fell like a plaintive cry, echoing across the lake before fading into silence. I told myself it was just the wind, or a distant animal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was out there in the darkness, watching my cabin with patient, hungry eyes. 3 days later, I received my first emergency call. A family of hikers had veered off the main trail and become disoriented in the dense forest. According to their GPS coordinates, they were about 4 miles east of my position, in an area known as Whispering Ridge. The sun was already low in the sky as I packed my emergency gear. First aid kit, extra water, flashlights, emergency blankets. I'd have to hurry to reach them before nightfall. The thought of being in the forest after dark made my skin crawl, but I couldn't leave a family stranded overnight. As I hiked the narrow trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made me flinch. The dense canopy overhead blocked much of the fading light, casting the forest floor in deep shadow. I found the family, a couple with their teenage daughter, huddled near a fallen log. The father had twisted his ankle, and they'd been unable to continue. Their relief at seeing me was palpable. "Thank God," the mother said. "We thought we might have to spend the night out here." "We need to move quickly," I replied, helping the father to his feet. "It'll be dark soon." "We saw something," the daughter said suddenly. Her voice was hushed, her eyes wide. "While we were waiting, in the trees over there." I followed her gaze to a dense thicket about 50 yards away. "What did you see?" "It was tall, really tall, standing on 2 legs, but not human." She shivered. "It was watching us." "Probably just a bear," I said with forced confidence. "They sometimes stand on their hind legs to get a better look." But I knew bears didn't stand and watch for extended periods, and they certainly didn't hide in thickets, observing with calculated interest. We started back toward the cabin, moving as quickly as the father's injury would allow. Darkness was falling rapidly now, the forest transforming into a maze of shadows and whispers. I kept my flashlight trained on the path ahead, trying not to think about what might be following us. We were about a mile from the cabin when I heard it, the same moaning call I'd heard that first night, but closer now, much closer. I froze, listening as it echoed through the trees. "What was that?" the mother whispered, clutching her daughter's arm. "Just the wind," I lied. "We need to keep moving." But as we resumed our trek, the calls continued, sometimes to our left, sometimes to our right. It was as if something was pacing us through the forest, always just out of sight. Then the daughter screamed. Following her pointing finger, I swept my flashlight toward a gap between 2 massive trees. For just a moment, the beam illuminated a figure, impossibly tall and broad, covered in dark hair. But it was the eyes that struck me, reflective and intelligent, glowing with an amber light that wasn't just a reflection of my flashlight. The figure held my gaze for a heartbeat before melting back into the darkness. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing the daughter's hand. The father, adrenaline overriding his pain, supported his wife as we crashed through the underbrush. Behind us, something large moved through the forest with frightening speed. Branches snapped and leaves rustled as it pursued us, always just out of sight but drawing steadily closer. The lights of my cabin appeared through the trees, salvation just yards away. We burst from the forest edge and sprinted across the clearing, the presence behind us pausing at the tree line. I hustled the family inside, locking the door and pulling the shutters closed. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. "What was that thing?" the father demanded, his face pale. I had no answer for him. Or rather, I had an answer I wasn't ready to accept. That night, after using the satellite phone to arrange evacuation for the family the next morning, I returned to Jenna's journal, reading each entry with new understanding. Something was stalking these woods, something that wasn't supposed to exist. The locals had a name for it, a name passed down through generations of native tribes in the region. They called it Szczelek, the Shadow Walker, not just an animal, but a guardian of the forest with ancient intelligence and deadly purpose. As I sat in the darkened cabin listening to the family's restless sleep in the adjacent room, I heard heavy footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate steps that made the wooden boards creak beneath tremendous weight. Then came the sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come, a low, guttural voice from just outside the window, speaking my name. "Takoda," it whispered in the darkness. "Takoda, come outside." Morning came with blessed sunlight streaming through the windows, banishing the horrors of the night. I'd spent hours huddled in my chair, clutching a flashlight and a kitchen knife, listening to the thing on the porch circle the cabin. Occasionally, it would stop at a window and tap gently on the glass, tap, 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 as if politely requesting entry. The family had slept through it all, exhausted from their ordeal. Now they sat at my kitchen table, sipping instant coffee and glancing nervously at the forest beyond the windows. The evacuation helicopter should be here by noon, I told them, trying to sound more confident than I felt. They'll take you directly back to the ranger station at Port Angeles. You should come with us, the mother said. Her eyes were red-rimmed from poor sleep, her hands trembling slightly around her mug. After what we saw yesterday, I forced a smile. It's my job to stay. Besides, it was probably just a bear. None of us believed that, but they didn't argue. I suspected they were simply grateful to be leaving. When the helicopter finally arrived, its rhythmic thumping a welcome intrusion on the forest silence, I found myself fighting the urge to climb aboard with them. Instead, I helped them with their gear and waved as the aircraft lifted above the treetops and disappeared over the ridge. The silence that followed was deafening. That afternoon, I hiked to the location where we'd encountered the creature. I told myself I was being rational, scientific, looking for tracks or other evidence. In reality, I was driven by a compulsive need to confirm what I'd seen, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The forest was different in daylight, less menacing, more serene. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the moss-covered ground. Birds called to one another overhead, and occasionally a squirrel or chipmunk would dart across my path. At the spot where we'd seen the figure, I found what I was looking for, and what I was dreading. A set of footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. They were unmistakably humanoid in shape, but massive, at least 18 inches long and incredibly wide. The stride length between prints was over 4 feet, suggesting a creature of impossible height. I photographed the prints with my phone, then knelt to examine them more closely. The impression showed 5 toes, like a human foot, but with a different distribution of weight. Whatever had made these tracks walked differently than a person. As I studied the area, I noticed broken branches high above, 8 or 9 feet off the ground, where something large had pushed through the undergrowth. In several places, I found tufts of dark, coarse hair snagged on tree bark. I was collecting one of these samples when I heard a branch snap behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The forest had gone silent. No bird calls, no rustling leaves. Just heavy, expectant silence. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. My voice echoed briefly before being swallowed by the trees. Nothing answered, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, calculating. I backed away slowly, then turned and walked as calmly as I could manage back toward the trail. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but some deeper knowledge told me that running would be a mistake. Whatever was watching me was a predator, and predators chase fleeing prey. That night, I called Mason on the satellite phone. I needed answers, and I suspected he knew more than he'd told me. "So you've seen it," he said after I described my encounter. There was no surprise in his voice, only resignation. "What is it, Mason?" I demanded. "And why the hell didn't you warn me?" He sighed heavily. "Would you have believed me if I'd told you there was a 9-foot-tall, hairy hominid wandering around the forest? You could have tried. Look, we don't talk about it, all right? Official policy. Too many cranks and monster hunters would flood the park if word got out." "So the Forest Service knows?" A long pause. "Let's just say there's an understanding. We don't bother it. It generally doesn't bother us." "Generally?" Another pause. "There have been incidents, mostly with people who disrespect the forest. Poachers, illegal loggers, people who stay too long in certain areas." "What happened to Jenna, the ranger before me?" Mason's voice dropped. "She got too curious, started leaving food out, trying to make contact. Thought she could communicate with it." A chill ran through me. "And nothing. She requested a transfer, and we gave it to her. She's at Mount Rainier now." I wasn't sure I believed him. There was something in his voice, a hesitation, a careful choice of words. "Listen," Mason continued, "just do your job and keep to yourself. It won't hurt you if you don't provoke it. It's watching my cabin at night, calling my name." Silence on the line. "Mason? That's not normal," he finally responded. They're usually more shy than that. There's more than one, a family group, we think, been in these woods for generations. After ending the call, I sat in the darkening cabin, Mason's words echoing in my mind. A family group. Generations. The implications were staggering. As I pondered this, my satellite phone pinged with an incoming email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, j.alvarez@personal.net. To Dakota Williams, from Jenna Alvarez. Subject, Rainwater Station. If you're reading this, you've seen it. I set this email to send automatically when someone accessed the emergency satellite system from the cabin. Don't trust what they tell you. There's more happening at Rainwater than they admit. Check the loose floorboard under the kitchen table. I left something there. Be careful. They're watching the cabin, not just the creatures. Jenna. I stared at the screen, a new fear blooming in my chest. What did she mean? Not just the creatures. Who else was watching? Moving to the kitchen, I knelt and examined the floorboards beneath the table. One board shifted slightly under pressure. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled it up. Inside the small cavity was a weatherproof case. Opening it, I found a thumb drive, a small notebook, and a baggie containing several dark hairs, similar to those I'd collected in the forest. The notebook contained Jenna's private observations, separate from the official journal on the shelf. Her handwriting became increasingly erratic with each entry. Found evidence today, not just folklore or misidentified bears. Real, living hominids previously undocumented. Evolutionary offshoots, relict population. Kay says to drop it. Claims we have an arrangement. What does that mean? Hair samples match nothing in genetic database. Closest approximation, 85% human, 15% unknown. They're intelligent, problem-solving, using tools, communicating with each other. This is the anthropological discovery of the century. Someone removed my trail cameras, not animals. The memory cards were taken, casings left behind. Who's interfering? The final pages detailed her plans to gather conclusive evidence before going public, followed by increasingly paranoid notes about being watched by someone from the service. I plugged the thumb drive into my laptop. It contained dozens of audio files, recordings from Jenna's trail cameras. With shaking hands, I clicked on one labeled midnight_encounter_3.mp3. At first, there was only forest ambience. Wind in the trees, distant owl calls. Then came a series of rhythmic grunts and whoops, followed by wood knocking against wood, communicating. Most chilling was the final segment, something large moving near the microphone, breathing heavily. Then a voice, deep and guttural but unmistakably forming words. Go. Away. Human. I slammed the laptop closed, my heart pounding. They could speak, or at least mimic human speech. That night, the stalking around my cabin intensified. Not one, but multiple sets of footsteps circled the structure. Occasionally, they would stop, and I would hear soft vocalizations, a language of sorts, being spoken just outside my walls. Around 2 a.m., a new sound joined the nocturnal symphony, the distant hum of a vehicle engine. I peered through a crack in the shutters to see headlights moving along the access road, then stopping just before reaching the clearing. The lights extinguished, but I could hear car doors opening and closing. People. Here, in the middle of the night. I expected the creatures to flee from the human intrusion, but the footsteps around my cabin continued their patrol. If anything, they drew closer to the building, as if protective. Through the window, I could make out flashlight beams moving through the trees near the edge of the clearing. Two figures in dark clothing emerging from the forest. They paused, scanning the area, then began approaching the cabin. A sudden cacophony erupted from the surrounding forest. Howls, screams, and wood knocking coming from all directions. The flashlight beams swung wildly as the figures froze. One of the dark shapes shouted something to the other, pointing urgently back toward the trees. They retreated rapidly, flashlights bobbing as they ran. Car doors slammed, an engine roared to life, and tires spun on dirt as the vehicle accelerated away. The forest sounds continued for several minutes after the vehicle departed, then gradually subsided. The footsteps resumed their circuit of my cabin, but they seemed less threatening now. Almost reassuring. I didn't sleep that night. As dawn approached, I heard a final circuit of heavy footsteps, then silence as the creatures retreated into the forest. When morning came, I ventured outside, scanning the tree line nervously. In the dirt near my porch, I found a freshly killed rabbit, laid out deliberately where I would find it. A gift? A warning? I wasn't sure. On the access road, I found tire tracks, proof I hadn't imagined the nighttime visitors. Kneeling beside them, I noticed distinctive treads, government-issue tires, like those on Mason's truck. That afternoon, I hiked to the highest point in the area, where satellite reception was strongest. I called an old college friend who now worked for the biology department at the University of Washington. "Liv, I need a favor," I said when she answered. "It's important, and it needs to stay between us." "You sound terrible. What's going on?" "I'm sending you some photos and audio files. I need you to analyze them. Tell me what you're hearing and seeing." "What am I looking for?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Something, not human, but close." 2 days later, Liv called back, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief. "Dakota, what the hell did you send me? Those vocalizations. They're structured, syntactic. It's language, not human, but definitely language." "And the hair samples?" "The DNA is, well, it's impossible. Primates, certainly. Some sequences match Homo sapiens, but others don't match anything in our databases. If I didn't know better, I'd say you found a new species of hominid. Or an old one," I murmured. "What?" "Nothing. What about the footprints?" "Based on the measurements and photos, whatever made those tracks would stand between 8 and 10 feet tall. The weight distribution suggests habitual bipedalism, but different muscle attachments than modern humans." I thanked her and made her promise again to keep this confidential. As I ended the call, I noticed a dark figure watching from the tree line far below, standing upright, perfectly still. When I looked again, it was gone. That night, I left my shutters open, a single lamp burning on my table. I placed a bowl of fruit on my porch, an offering, a gesture of peace. From the darkness beyond my window came that now familiar voice. "Dakota, why stay?" I approached the window slowly. "This is my post," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Danger," the voice replied after a pause. "Not from us." "Who then?" But there was no answer, just the soft sound of retreating footsteps. In the morning, the fruit was gone. In its place was a small stone carving, crude but recognizable as a human figure with a star on its chest, a ranger's badge, a warning, and pinned beneath it, a scrap of paper torn from a Forest Service notepad, written in familiar handwriting. Mason's handwriting, monthly inspection. 15th, extraction if necessary. Today was the 12th. I had 3 days to decide what to do. I spent the next day combing through Jenna's notes, photographs, and audio recordings. The picture that emerged was disturbing yet fascinating. The creatures, Sjalik, as the local tribes called them, had coexisted with humans in these forests for thousands of years. Mostly reclusive, they retreated deeper into the wilderness as human settlements expanded. According to the tribal histories Jenna had collected, the Sjalik weren't just animals. They were intelligent beings with their own culture, language, and social structures. They were guardians of the forest, protectors of the natural balance. Most significantly, they had an arrangement with certain humans, an understanding born of mutual respect. They would remain hidden, and those who knew of them would protect their secret. But why? Why the official silence? Why would the Forest Service cover up the existence of what would be the greatest zoological discovery of the century? The answer came to me as I reviewed Jenna's final notes. It wasn't about protecting the public from knowledge of the creatures. It was about protecting the creatures from the public, and from something far worse. Jenna had mapped unusual patterns of land purchases around the national park, shell companies acquiring large tracts of forest, mining permits being quietly approved, geological surveys focusing on specific regions that, according to her observations, contained the highest concentration of Sjalik activity. Something valuable lay beneath the forest floor, something worth millions, perhaps billions. And the only thing standing in the way of its extraction was the continued designation of the land as protected wilderness. If proof of an undiscovered hominid species emerged, the conservation battle would be over before it began. No company would be permitted to destroy the habitat of such a monumental discovery. Unless, of course, no such discovery was ever announced. I sat back, my mind racing. If I was right, then the arrangement Mason had mentioned wasn't between the Forest Service and the Schalik. It was between the Forest Service and whoever wanted the land. Keep the creatures hidden, discredit anyone who claimed to have seen them. Maintain the fiction that Bigfoot was just a myth, a campfire story. My satellite phone rang, startling me. Mason's number. "Routine check-in," he said when I answered. "Everything quiet up there?" "Quiet enough," I replied, trying to sound casual. "When did you say you'd be coming by for inspection?" A slight pause. "The 15th, day after tomorrow. Just standard procedure. Looking forward to it." After ending the call, I packed quickly. Essential supplies, Jenna's evidence, my own notes and photographs. I couldn't stay at the cabin. Whatever extraction meant, I doubted it involved just removing me from my post. As dusk fell, I shouldered my backpack and locked the cabin behind me. If I hiked through the night, I could reach the main access road by morning, then follow it to the highway. But as I entered the tree line, a massive shape stepped into my path. It stood over 8 feet tall, its broad shoulders and powerful frame covered in dark hair. In the fading light, I could make out its face, a blend of ape and human features, with a heavy brow and deep-set eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. I froze, my body trembling. Despite everything I'd learned, despite my growing suspicions about who the real threat was, coming face to face with the creature sent primal fear coursing through me. It made no move to approach, simply watching me with those ancient eyes. "I'm leaving," I managed to say. "I won't tell anyone about you." The creature tilted its massive head. "Others coming. I know. Tomorrow. That's why I need to go now." It shook its head slowly. "Not safe. Road watched." My heart sank. If they were monitoring the roads, I'd never make it out. The creature gestured deeper into the forest. "Come." I hesitated. Following this being into the darkening woods went against every instinct for self-preservation. Yet somehow, I trusted it more than I trusted Mason or anyone else from the Forest Service right now. "Where?" "Safe place. Old place." Decision made, I nodded and followed as it turned and moved into the forest. Despite its size, it navigated the dense undergrowth with surprising grace, making less noise than I did. We traveled for hours through the darkness, the creature occasionally pausing to listen or to make soft vocalizations that were answered from the surrounding forest. We were being escorted, I realized, by unseen guardians moving parallel to our path. Just before dawn, we reached a sheer rock face rising from the forest floor. The creature led me to what appeared to be a solid wall of stone, then reached into a crevice and pulled. A section of rock, actually a cleverly disguised door made of wood and stone, swung open. Beyond was a cave, its entrance hidden by the false rock face. The creature ducked inside, gesturing for me to follow. The cave opened into a large chamber illuminated by shafts of light from small openings in the ceiling. As my eyes adjusted, I gasped. The walls were covered with paintings, ancient pictographs depicting human and Schalik figures coexisting, hunting together, sharing knowledge, defending the forest from invaders. More surprising were the artifacts scattered throughout the space. Stone tools, yes, but also items of obvious human manufacture. Old metal cooking pots, tattered blankets, books with decaying leather bindings. My guide watched me take it all in, then moved to a small alcove and returned with something that made my breath catch. A ranger's badge, tarnished with age. "Friend," it said, holding up the badge. "Long ago." I understood then. This wasn't the first time the Schalik had formed an alliance with a human guardian. Throughout history, certain individuals had been trusted with their secret, had helped protect them. "Why show me this?" I asked. The creature's expression was difficult to read, but its eyes held something like sorrow. "Land sick, men dig, poison water." It gestured to its chest. "Few remain." It led me deeper into the cave system, through tunnels that eventually opened into another chamber. Here, a small group of Schalik gathered, perhaps a dozen individuals of varying sizes. Some appeared old, their hair streaked with gray. Two females cradled infants against their chests. Among the last of their kind, I realized, pushed to the brink by human encroachment, by the steady destruction of their habitat. One of the older creatures approached, carrying a weathered leather satchel. It held the bag out to me. Inside was a journal dated 1937, the handwriting faded but legible. Today, I made contact with the beings the natives call Schalak. After months of leaving gifts and gaining their trust, they have finally revealed themselves to me. They are not animals, as some believe, but intelligent creatures with their own language and customs. The logging operations push ever closer to their territory. The tribal elders have entrusted me with their greatest secret, the existence of these forest people, in hopes that, as a government man, I might help protect them. God forgive me, I have reported nothing to my superiors. To do so would bring scientists, hunters, and curiosity seekers swarming into these woods. Instead, I have marked certain areas as hazardous on official maps, steering development away from their core habitat. This deception weighs heavily on my conscience, yet I cannot bear the thought of these gentle beings being captured or killed in the name of progress. The journal continued, detailing decades of secret cooperation between this ranger and the Schalak. He had helped them adapt as the world changed around them, brought them medical supplies during outbreaks of human diseases, and most importantly, kept their existence hidden from those who would exploit or harm them. The final entry was dated 1976. My time grows short. The cancer spreads quickly now. I have done what I can for my friends, but I fear for their future. The protected lands shrink each year as lumber and mining interests press their claims. I pass this journal to them, in hopes that someday someone worthy will find it and continue what I have started. Someone who sees beyond fear and curiosity to the deeper truth, that we are not the only thinking beings on this earth, and we have no right to claim it all for ourselves. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The older Sechalek watched me intently, as if trying to gauge my reaction, to determine if I was worthy of the trust placed in me. "The men who come tomorrow," I said slowly. "They know about you?" The creature nodded. "Some know. Hunt us. Take land." I thought of the geological surveys in Jenna's notes, the pattern of land acquisitions. There's something valuable under the forest, isn't there? Something they want to mine? Again, a nod. Black stone, burns, coal. Of course, the Olympic Peninsula had untapped coal reserves worth billions. If the land lost its protected status, if it was open for resource development. "How can I help?" I asked. The oldest Schalak approached me, laying a massive hand gently on my shoulder. Despite its size and strength, the touch was delicate, careful. "Show truth," it said simply. "To world." Jenna had tried that, I realized. She'd gathered evidence, planned to reveal everything, and they'd stopped her somehow, silenced her, or threatened her into compliance. But Jenna had worked alone. I didn't have to. I thought of Liv at the university, of the journalist friends I still had from my previous life. The world had changed since the old ranger's time. Information could spread globally in seconds, becoming impossible to suppress once released. I made my decision. "I'll need to use the satellite phone from my cabin. Can you get me back there without being seen?" The creatures exchanged looks, then the one who had guided me nodded. "Nighttime, we help." We spent the day planning. I would return to the cabin after dark, use the satellite connection to upload everything. Jenna's evidence, my own documentation, the journal, to multiple secure locations. Then I would hike out before Mason and whoever came with him arrived the next day. The Schalak knew the forest better than any human. They would guide me through paths too rugged for vehicles, avoiding the roads entirely until I reached the highway far from the main entrance. As night fell, we made our way back toward the cabin. 4 Sechalek accompanied me, moving like shadows through the forest. Despite their size, they navigated the darkness with uncanny precision, steering me around obstacles I couldn't even see. We were less than a mile from the clearing when one of them froze, raising a hand for silence. It tilted its head, listening, then made a soft warning sound to the others. "Men," it whispered to me, "at your home." They'd come early. Mason must have suspected something from our conversation. One of the creatures gestured for me to follow, leading our group in a wide arc around the cabin. From a vantage point on higher ground, I could see vehicles parked in the clearing, not just Mason's truck, but two black SUVs with government plates. Flashlight beams swept the forest edge as armed men established a perimeter around the cabin. This wasn't a routine inspection. It was an operation. I watched as Mason emerged from my cabin speaking into a radio. Even from this distance, his frustration was evident in his body language. They'd expected to find me there. My Schelick guide touched my arm gently, then pointed to the west, an alternate route. I nodded, following as we retreated silently into the forest. Dawn found us at the edge of the park, overlooking a two-lane highway that wound through the valley below. My guides would go no further. This close to civilization, the risk of being seen was too great. The eldest Schelick approached me one last time. From around its neck, it removed a small leather pouch suspended on a cord and placed it in my hand. Inside was a carved stone pendant in the shape of a stylized face, half human, half Schelick. A symbol of connection, of shared guardianship. "Remember," it said, its deep voice rumbling softly, "not alone. Forest watches." Then they were gone, melting into the trees with barely a sound, leaving me to make my way down to the highway. 3 weeks later, I sat in Lee's university office, watching as she examined the final DNA sequencing results. "It's revolutionary," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "A previously unknown hominid species, showing evolutionary divergence from Homo sapiens approximately 250,000 years ago, yet with clear evidence of ongoing adaptation to changing environments. The evidence was undeniable. Between Jenna's documentation, my own recordings and photographs, the 1937 journal, and most importantly, the DNA analysis, we had proof of exactly what the mining interests feared most, an endangered intelligent species whose habitat must be protected at all costs." My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another major outlet had picked up the story. The revelations had exploded across both scientific publications and mainstream media, too widespread to be contained or discredited. Congressional hearings had been announced to investigate the apparent conspiracy within certain branches of the Forest Service. Mason and several higher-ranking officials had been suspended pending investigation. Most importantly, an emergency conservation order had been issued, expanding the protected status of the Olympic Peninsula forests and permanently barring any resource extraction activities. I touched the stone pendant I now wore around my neck. The Schelick would remain hidden, continuing their ancient way of life in the deep forests. But now they would do so under the umbrella of official protection, their existence acknowledged in scientific literature, if not in the public imagination. My phone rang. Another journalist seeking comment. I let it go to voicemail. I'd said everything I needed to say in the comprehensive documentation we'd released. Tomorrow, I would return to the park, not as a ranger. That career was certainly over, but as something the old journal keeper would have understood. A friend, a guardian, a keeper of ancient promises. As dusk fell outside Liv's office window, I thought I glimpsed a tall figure watching from the edge of the campus woods. When I looked again, it was gone. But I knew I wasn't alone. I never would be again. The forest was watching, and in the deepening shadows of wild places across the continent, the Schelick continued their silent vigil, guardians of secrets far older than human memory. I touched the pendant once more, feeling its contours beneath my fingers, the face that was half human, half other, not so different after all. The first time I heard it, I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, watching the mist roll across the surface of Lake Manitou. It was a strange, guttural sound. Not quite animal, not quite human, somewhere in between. That should have been my first warning. My name is Kalataka Blackwood, but most people just call me Quinn. I'd taken the park ranger position at Manitou Wilderness Reserve 6 months earlier, trading a cramped apartment in Seattle for 500 square miles of pristine forest and mountains straddling the Canadian border. The name Kalataka came from my mother's Hopi heritage. It means guardian of the people. An appropriate name for a park ranger, I suppose. though I doubt she could have predicted my career path when she named me. The reserve was remote, even by wilderness standards. The nearest town, Pinecrest, was a 90-minute drive south, and that was only if the weather cooperated. My cabin sat on the eastern shore of Lake Manitou, a glacier-carved body of water so deep and cold that legend said it never fully gave up its dead. The old-timers in Pinecrest had plenty of stories about the lake and the surrounding woods, but I'd dismiss them as the usual rural folklore designed to scare tourists and children. That was before the disappearances began. The first was a solo hiker named Marcus Jensen, an experienced outdoorsman from Vancouver who'd been coming to these woods for 20 years. His wife reported him missing when he failed to check in after 3 days. Standard protocol had us form search parties, and I headed up the northern quadrant. We found his campsite on day 2 of the search. Tent still standing, gear neatly arranged, food hanging properly from a tree to avoid bears. The only unusual things were his boots, sitting side by side outside his tent, and the strange wide impressions leading away from the camp. "What do you make of these?" asked Rivera, a seasonal ranger who'd joined just a month ago. I crouched down to examine the markings. They were roughly oval-shaped, much larger than any human footprint, with what appeared to be 5-toe impressions at the front. "Bear, maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. Bear tracks were distinctive, and these weren't them. "Let's keep moving." We never found Marcus Jensen. After a week, the search was scaled back, and after 2, it was called off entirely. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead by misadventure. I didn't sign off on it. Something about those tracks kept nagging at me. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, a couple from Montana, the Harrises. They'd planned a week-long anniversary trip at one of the remote campsites along the northern ridge. When they didn't return to check out, I drove out to their last known location. Their SUV was parked at the trailhead looking untouched. I hiked the 3 miles to their campsite alone, radio crackling with static the entire way. The scene was eerily similar. Tent still standing, gear undisturbed. But this time, there was something else. On the trunk of a massive pine overlooking their campsite, about 8 feet up, deep gouges marred the bark. 5 parallel lines, too high and too wide set to be from a bear. Something cold settled in my stomach as I stared at those marks, knowing instinctively they hadn't been made by any animal I was familiar with. More concerning still were the long, dark hairs caught in the bark. I collected several strands, storing them in an evidence bag. I'd get them analyzed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the results. As I made my way back to my truck, the forest seemed to close in around me. The usual woodland sounds, birdsong, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had fallen silent. I found myself walking faster, one hand resting on my sidearm. That night, alone in my cabin, I pulled out my laptop and began researching those tracks and claw marks. 3 hours later, I sat back, rubbing my eyes. The internet was full of supposed Bigfoot evidence, footprint casts, blurry photos, and long-winded testimonials from people who claimed to have encountered the creature. Most seemed like obvious hoaxes or misidentifications, but a few accounts caught my attention. Descriptions of the tracks I'd found, the strange silence that fell over the forest, the eerie feeling of being watched, those resonated with my experience. I scoffed at myself. Bigfoot? Really? I'd worked in national parks across 4 states and never given any credence to the legend. But something was happening in these woods, something I couldn't explain. A week passed without incident. I'd sent the hair samples to a lab in Vancouver, telling them it was suspected to be from an unidentified large mammal. I didn't mention Bigfoot. I didn't want to be laughed out of my career. The Harrises were added to the missing persons database, another mysterious disappearance in the vast wilderness. Then Kane showed up at my door. I'd been dozing in my chair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table beside me, when 3 sharp knocks jolted me awake. It was just after 1 a.m. No one should have been able to reach my cabin at that hour without me hearing a vehicle approach. I grabbed my flashlight and service weapon before opening the door a crack. Quinn Blackwood? The man on my porch was tall and lean with weathered skin and sharp, intelligent eyes, Australian by his accent. "Who's asking?" "Name's Dr. Kane Marshall. I'm a biologist from University of Melbourne. Mind if I come in? It's bloody freezing out here. I hesitated, then opened the door wider. As he stepped into the light, I noticed the scars, 3 parallel lines running from his temple down to his jaw on the left side of his face. "Nice little setup you've got," he said, glancing around my cabin. "Remote, quiet. What are you doing here, Dr. Marshall? And how did you find my cabin in the middle of the night?" He smiled thinly. "I followed the service road, then the trail. As for why I'm here, the same reason you've been researching Sasquatch sightings online. Something's happening in these woods, Ranger Blackwood." My hand tightened on my weapon. "I never said anything about—" "You didn't have to. The hair samples you sent to the lab. They forwarded them to a colleague of mine. Unusual protein structure, follicle pattern unlike any known North American mammal. Sound familiar?" I sank into my chair. "You've seen this before." Kane's eyes darkened. "Australia, 2018. We call it something different there, yowie. Then again, 2 years ago in the Olympic Peninsula. Same creature, different names across cultures." He gestured to the scars on his face. "Got these from my first encounter. I was lucky. You're telling me Bigfoot is real, and it's taking people from my park? I'm telling you something is out there, something most of science doesn't acknowledge, and it's getting bolder." I poured myself another finger of whiskey and offered the bottle to Kane. He accepted with a nod. "There were stories," I said quietly. "Local legends about the woods around Lake Manitou. I didn't pay them much attention." "You should have," Kane said, his voice equally soft. "Indigenous peoples worldwide have similar accounts of these creatures. They're described as intelligent, territorial, and normally reclusive. When they start taking people, it usually means something has changed. Their habitat disturbed, food sources depleted. Or they're being provoked," I added, remembering the new logging operation that had started up just beyond the northern boundary of the reserve 6 months ago, right when I'd taken the job. The timing suddenly seemed significant. Kane nodded grimly. "That would do it." "So what now? I can't exactly file a report saying Bigfoot is abducting campers." "No, but you can help me track it, document it, find evidence no one can dismiss." His eyes gleamed with intensity. "I've been studying these creatures for 15 years, Quinn. This is the closest I've ever gotten." I should have thrown him out right then. Called in his presence as a trespasser, had him escorted from the reserve. Instead, I found myself agreeing to meet him the next morning. We'd investigate the northern ridge together, check the areas around the disappearances. After Kane left, I tried to sleep, but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I got up and checked the locks twice, then sat by the window with my rifle across my lap until dawn broke. The next day dawned cold and misty. I met Kane at the trailhead as planned, surprised to see he'd come prepared with serious hiking gear and what looked like scientific equipment in his pack. "What's all that?" I asked, nodding at his bag. "Thermal imaging camera, motion-activated trail cams, hair snares, cast material for footprints." He smiled at my expression. "I've done this before, remember?" We hiked in silence for the first hour, following the trail toward the ridge where the Harrises had disappeared. The forest was unusually quiet, the mist hanging between the trees creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Occasionally, Kane would stop and inspect something, a broken branch, disturbed earth, before moving on. By midday, we'd reached the Harrises' campsite. It looked much as I'd left it, though now there was yellow police tape fluttering from the trees. Kane immediately went to the pine tree with the claw marks. He ran his fingers over the gouges, measuring their depth and spacing with a small tool from his pack. "Consistent with what I've documented before," he murmured. "Adult male, judging by the height and strength needed to make these marks." He looked back at me. "They're territorial displays, meant to warn others away. Others of its kind? And us. They're intelligent, Quinn, more than most people realize." As we continued our investigation, Kane set up motion-triggered cameras at strategic points and collected soil samples from areas where the ground seemed disturbed. I found myself impressed by his methodical approach, despite my lingering skepticism. Late in the afternoon, as we were preparing to head back, Kane suddenly froze. He held up a hand, signaling me to stop and listen. At first, I heard nothing. Then, carrying through the trees, came a sound that made my skin crawl. a long, low moan that seemed to reverberate from multiple directions at once, ending in a series of rhythmic grunts. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Kane's face had gone pale. Vocalization, they use them to communicate over long distances. He was hastily unpacking his thermal camera. "They're normally most active at dawn and dusk." The sound came again, closer this time. Through the trees ahead, something large moved in the gathering shadows. I couldn't make out its shape, just an impression of height and bulk that didn't belong in these woods. "Kane," I said, my voice tight, "we should go." He ignored me, focused on his camera. "Just need to get a thermal reading." The cracking of branches echoed from our right, impossibly close. Whatever was making that sound had circled around behind us with frightening speed and silence. "Now, Kane!" I drew my weapon, backing toward the trail. "We're leaving." This time he listened, gathering his gear with frantic movements. We retreated down the path, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The sensation of being followed was overwhelming, a presence just beyond the trees, keeping pace with us effortlessly. Once, I caught a glimpse of movement, a massive figure slipping between two giant hemlocks, at least 8 feet tall with broad shoulders, but it was gone before I could focus on it clearly. We didn't stop running until we reached the trailhead and my truck. Breathing hard, I fumbled with the keys while Kane kept watch, his camera held ready. "Did you get anything?" I asked as we finally pulled away, gravel spraying from beneath the tires. Kane checked the camera's display and nodded slowly. "Partial thermal image, not clear but definitely bipedal and large." He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of fear and excitement. "It was stalking us, Quinn, testing us. They do that before they—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Back at my cabin, we reviewed Kane's findings. The thermal image showed a hulking heat signature, vaguely humanoid but much larger than a person. He'd also managed to collect more hair samples, and what might have been a partial footprint. "I've got colleagues who can analyze these properly," Kane said, carefully packing the samples. "But it'll take time." "Time we may not have," I replied, thinking of the missing hikers. "If this thing is taking people—" "We don't know that for certain," Kane interrupted. "Some accounts suggest they sometimes relocate people they perceive as threats, take them far from their territory and release them. And others?" Kane's silence was answer enough. "I need to close the northern section of the park," I decided. "Keep people away until we figure this out." "That might help in the short term," Kane agreed. "But eventually, you'll need more than just my word to keep that area restricted. You need concrete evidence." I nodded, my mind already formulating a plan. "We go back tomorrow, set up a base camp at the old fire lookout tower on the ridge. It gives us height advantage, shelter, and a good vantage point." Kane studied me for a moment. "You know what we're dealing with is dangerous, right? These aren't just animals, Quinn. They have cunning, possibly even a form of language. And if they've started taking people, something has made them break their normal patterns of behavior." "All the more reason to find out what we're dealing with," I said firmly. "This is my park, my responsibility." That night, Kane slept on my couch while I took the bedroom. Sleep proved elusive, my mind racing with the implications of what we'd encountered. If Kane was right, if these creatures really existed and were stalking humans in my park, it changed everything. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound from outside, something heavy moving on my porch. The wooden boards creaked under significant weight. I reached for my rifle, heart pounding. The doorknob rattled, once, twice, then silence. I crept to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out a huge silhouette retreating into the tree line. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, arms swinging lower than a human's would. "Quinn?" Kane's voice came from the living room. "Something's out there." "I know," I replied, not taking my eyes off the trees. "It was testing the door." "It found where you live," Kane said grimly. "That's not good." We spent the rest of the night alert, weapons ready, but whatever had visited didn't return. As dawn broke, I found massive footprints in the soft earth around my cabin, the same type we'd seen at the disappearance sites. And on my door, barely visible but unmistakable once spotted, were 5 mud-streaked fingerprints pressed into the wood, a message or a warning. Either way, our encounter in the woods had escalated things. The creature wasn't just aware of us, it was watching, evaluating, planning. I called my supervisor and arranged for the northern section of the park to be closed due to dangerous wildlife activity. It wasn't even a lie. As Kane and I prepared to head to the lookout tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a line. Whatever awaited us in those woods, I was no longer certain we were the hunters. We were being hunted. The fire lookout tower loomed above the tree line like a sentinel from another era. Built in the 1930s, it had been decommissioned years ago, but was still maintained as an emergency shelter. The wooden structure creaked as Kane and I climbed the stairs, our packs heavy with equipment and supplies. "Home, sweet home," I muttered as we reached the top. The small room was sparse but functional, a metal frame bed, a table bolted to the floor, and windows on all sides offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding wilderness. Kane immediately set to work, positioning cameras at each window and unpacking various scientific instruments. I took stock of our supplies. We had enough food and water for 3 days, emergency radio, first aid kit, and weapons, my service rifle and sidearm. "The logging operation is visible from here," Kane noted, pointing northwest where, in the distance, a brown scar cut through the otherwise unbroken forest. "Started recently?" "About 6 months ago," I confirmed, "right around when I took this post." "And when did the disappearances begin?" 4 months ago." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "Consistent with habitat disruption. The noise, the human presence, the destruction of trees, it would drive them deeper into the protected area." "There were no reports of anything unusual before I arrived," I said, setting up the camp stove. "No missing hikers, no strange sightings?" "They avoid humans when possible," Kane replied. "But when their territory shrinks, conflict becomes inevitable." As evening approached, we settled into a routine. One of us would keep watch while the other rested. Kane took first shift, his eyes scanning the darkening forest through a pair of high-powered binoculars. "Tell me about Australia," I said, heating water for coffee. "You mentioned encountering something similar there." Kane was quiet for a long moment. "I was doing field research in Queensland. Remote area, old-growth forest. The Aboriginal peoples had stories about the Eerie, a creature very similar to your Sasquatch. I dismissed them." His hand unconsciously touched the scars on his face. "I was collecting specimens alone one evening when I heard unusual vocalizations. I followed the sound." He sighed, lowering the binoculars. "I found a clearing where the trees had been arranged in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. While I was examining it, I felt watched. When I tried to leave, it charged me." "It attacked you?" "Warned me," he corrected. "If it had wanted to kill me, I wouldn't be here." The claws caught my face as it rushed past. Then it herded me away from the area, following until I was miles from that clearing. I never found it again. I digested this information quietly. "And the Olympic Peninsula? What happened there?" "Similar circumstances. Logging operation, protected forest, missing hikers. I tracked one for nearly 2 weeks before it led me to a cave system. Inside were items taken from missing persons, backpacks, clothing, cameras, but no bodies." "You think they collect objects from humans?" Kane nodded. "They're curious, intelligent. They study us, just as we study them." The radio crackled suddenly, making us both jump. A voice fought through the static. Rivera, the seasonal ranger. "Quinn, you copy? Over." I grabbed the handset. "Reading you, Rivera. What's up?" "Over. Got some hikers here at the station. Say they heard weird noises up by Cascade Falls, like screaming but not human. Thought you should know. Over." I exchanged glances with Kane. Cascade Falls was only 3 miles west of our position. "Copy that. Keep them there. I'll radio back. Over and out." I set the handset down. "Could be our friend." Kane was already gathering his thermal camera and recording equipment. "We should check it out." "In the dark? That's exactly when you said they're most active." "Precisely why it's the best time to gather evidence," he countered. "We have lights, weapons. We'll be careful." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We secured the tower, leaving most of our supplies but taking essential gear and weapons. The forest was different at night, a maze of shadows and sounds that played tricks on the senses. Our headlamps carved narrow tunnels of light through the darkness as we made our way toward the falls. The trail was well maintained but narrow, forcing us to walk single file. Kane led, his thermal camera sweeping the trees ahead. I followed, constantly checking our flanks and rear, unable to shake the feeling of being observed. About halfway to the falls, Kane stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. "Listen," he whispered. At first I heard only the typical night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Then it came, a long, mournful call that raised the hair on my arms. It wasn't human, wasn't quite animal either, a sound that didn't belong in these woods or any I'd known. "That's it," Kane breathed, excitement evident in his voice. He adjusted his camera, pointing it toward the sound. Coming from near the falls. We continued more cautiously, the calls growing louder and more varied. Sometimes low moans, sometimes staccato knocks and grunts that suggested communication rather than random animal noises. The trail opened into a clearing where Cascade Falls spilled 70 feet down a rock face into a deep pool below. The moonlight reflected off the water, providing better visibility than the dense forest. Kane moved to the edge of the clearing, camera raised. "I'm picking up a heat signature," he whispered, "large, just beyond those trees across the pool." I raised my rifle, peering through the scope. At first I saw nothing. Then a shadow moved against the darkness, massive and bipedal, its outline vaguely humanoid but proportioned all wrong. Too tall, arms too long, head set directly on powerful shoulders without much of a neck. "Are you seeing this?" I hissed. Kane nodded, his camera whirring softly. Adult male, I think, 8, maybe 9 feet tall. The figure moved with surprising grace along the tree line, stopping occasionally to raise its head as if scenting the air. Suddenly, it went still. Even from across the clearing, I could feel its attention shift, focusing directly on our position. "It knows we're here," I whispered. As if in response, the creature stepped partially into the moonlight. I caught a glimpse of a broad, sloped forehead, deep-set eyes reflecting the light like a deer's, and a coat of dark hair covering its body. Then it opened its mouth and released a call so powerful it seemed to vibrate the air around us. A warning impossible to misinterpret. "We need to go," I said, backing away slowly. "Now." Kane was transfixed, his camera still recording. "This is unprecedented footage. If I can just—" A cracking sound came from directly behind us. I spun around, rifle raised, to find another figure blocking the trail we'd come from. Smaller than the first, but still towering over us, its breathing audible in the quiet night. We were trapped between them. "Don't run," Kane whispered urgently. "No sudden movements." The second creature took a step forward, now barely 20 feet away. I could make out more details. A powerful chest, long arms ending in large hands, a face that was both alien and disturbingly familiar in its expressions. Its eyes held intelligence as it assessed us. Slowly, deliberately, it reached down and picked up a large rock. With unexpected precision, it hurled the stone into the trees to our left. The message was clear. That was the direction it wanted us to go. "They're hurting us," Kane murmured. "Away from the falls." Away from what? I wondered aloud. We had little choice but to comply, moving carefully in the indicated direction. It wasn't the trail back to the tower, but a game path that led deeper into the forest. The creatures followed, one ahead and one behind, keeping us contained but not approaching closer. After half an hour of this tense procession, the path opened into another clearing. What I saw there stopped me cold. In the center of the clearing stood what could only be described as a structure, a crude shelter built from interwoven branches and foliage, large enough to house several of the creatures. Around it were scattered items I recognized with a chill. A backpack that matched the description of Marcus Jensen's, clothing that looked like what the Harrises had been wearing, and other objects clearly of human origin. "My God," Kane breathed. "It's a nesting site." One of the creatures, the larger one, moved toward the shelter and made a series of complex vocalizations. From within, something answered. "There are more of them," I whispered. As if on cue, 2 smaller figures emerged from the shelter. They moved with the same fluid grace but stood only about 6 feet tall, juveniles perhaps, or females. One carried something in its arms that I couldn't immediately identify. They're showing us something, Kane said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and scientific excitement. The smaller creature approached to within 30 feet, then carefully set its burden on the ground. It retreated, watching us expectantly. In the moonlight, I made out the shape of a plastic first aid kit, the type we stocked in the emergency caches throughout the park. They want us to see that they have this, I realized. But why? The answer came when one of the creatures made another sound and gestured toward the northwest, toward the logging operation. Kane lowered his camera slowly. They're trying to communicate, he said quietly. I think they're telling us someone's hurt. How can you possibly know that? Look at the pattern, he insisted. They intercepted us, herded us here, showed us their dwelling and the first aid kit, then pointed to the logging site. They could have attacked or driven us away completely, but they're trying to show us something. I hesitated, torn between disbelief and the undeniable reality before my eyes. These creatures, whatever they were not mindless animals. They were interacting with us in a way that suggested reasoning, planning, even a form of language. If someone is injured, it's my responsibility, I said finally. But I need to radio for backup. As I reached for my radio, the largest creature made a sudden, aggressive movement, stopping when I froze. Clearly, they didn't want me calling anyone else. I think it needs to be just us, Kane said. They're trusting us, but only us. That's a hell of an assumption. You have a better explanation for all this? He had a point. I lowered my hand slowly from the radio. Fine, but if this is a trap, then we're already in it, Kane finished grimly. We followed as the creatures led us through the forest, moving with surprising speed. Dawn was breaking by the time we approached the boundary where the reserve met the logging operation. The creatures grew more cautious here, keeping to the densest cover. Finally, they stopped, unwilling to go further into the thinning trees. The largest one gestured ahead, then melted back into the forest with the others, leaving Kane and me alone at the edge of the clear-cut area. Now what? I muttered. Kane pointed. Look there. About 200 yards ahead, partially hidden behind logging equipment, was a small portable building, likely an office or break room for the workers. No one should have been there this early, but I could see lights on inside. We approached cautiously. As we got closer, I noticed the door was slightly ajar, and what looked like drag marks in the dirt leading to it. Hello? I called, my hand on my sidearm. Park Service, anyone here? A weak voice answered from inside. Help, please. I pushed the door open, Kane right behind me. The small room was in disarray. Papers scattered, a chair overturned. On the floor lay a man in a logging company uniform, his face pale and drawn with pain. His leg was caught in what looked like a large trap, the kind that had been illegal for decades. Thank God, the man gasped when he saw us. Been here. All night. I knelt beside him, examining the trap. It was old but deadly, its teeth sunk deep into the man's calf. Blood had pooled beneath him. Who are you? I asked, already working to release the mechanism. Davis, he wheezed. Security, was checking, the perimeter, stepped in this thing, dragged myself here but couldn't. Radio's dead. Kane helped me free Davis from the trap while I applied pressure to the wound. It was bad. He'd lost a lot of blood. These traps are illegal, I said as we worked. Who said it? Davis shook his head weakly. Boss. Wanted to keep animals away from equipment. Didn't know what kind. Your boss is setting illegal traps around a protected wilderness area? My anger rose. What's his name? Mercer. Davis managed before his eyes rolled back and he passed out. Together, Kane and I stabilized Davis as best we could. Then I used the office phone to call for emergency medical evacuation. Within an hour, a helicopter was lifting Davis to the nearest hospital, while local sheriff's deputies began documenting the illegal traps. I gave my statement, carefully omitting any mention of Bigfoot or mysterious creatures. Illegal trapping adjacent to a wildlife reserve, the lead deputy said, shaking his head. Mercer's logging operation is going to face serious charges. Good, I replied firmly. By late afternoon, Kane and I were hiking back toward the fire tower, both exhausted but processing everything we'd witnessed. They knew, Kane said after a long silence. They knew a human was hurt, and led us to him. How would they know that? They patrol their territory. They probably observed him get caught, saw him drag himself to that building. They must have understood he needed help. I considered this. But why lead us? Why not simply avoid the whole area? Kane looked thoughtful. Maybe they recognized you as someone who protects the forest, just as they do. Rangers, game wardens. There are accounts of these creatures observing them specifically. The idea was unsettling, yet somehow resonant. Guardian of the people, I murmured, thinking of my name's meaning. What? Kalataka. It's what my name means. Guardian of the people. Kane smiled faintly. Perhaps they sensed that in you. We reached the tower as dusk was falling. Everything was as we'd left it, our supplies untouched. As Kane reviewed the footage he'd captured, I stood at the window gazing out at the darkening forest. Most of the video is usable, Kane said excitedly. Thermal imaging, clear vocalizations, even some visual confirmation. It's the best evidence I've ever collected. And what will you do with it? I asked, still looking out at the trees. His enthusiasm faltered. I don't know. Scientific recognition would be the goal, but the ridicule, the scrutiny. He sighed. And there's the creatures themselves to consider. If their existence were proven beyond doubt, what would happen to them, to this wilderness? I had been wrestling with the same questions. They'd never know peace again. Hunters, researchers, tourists, they'd flood in. The creatures would retreat deeper, become more aggressive in defending what remains of their territory. Exactly. Kane set his camera down. Maybe the mystery protects them. The irony wasn't lost on me. After witnessing what we had, after collecting evidence that could potentially change scientific understanding of these creatures, we were considering keeping it to ourselves. What about the missing hikers? I asked. Kane seemed to age before my eyes. I don't know. Maybe they stumbled too close to sensitive areas, nesting sites, young ones. Maybe the creatures relocated them far from here, or maybe... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. We both knew the less optimistic possibilities. As night fully claimed the forest, we heard it again, that distinctive call echoing through the trees. Not threatening now, but almost conversational. Different calls answered from various directions. They're talking to each other, Kane said quietly. Probably about us. I nodded, a strange sense of peace settling over me despite everything. We should leave in the morning. Let them have their forest back. Kane agreed, and we spent one last night in the tower, listening to the calls of creatures most of the world didn't believe existed. The next morning, as we prepared to depart, I noticed something placed carefully at the base of the tower steps, a small arrangement of forest flowers and berries laid out in a deliberate pattern. Beside it was Marcus Jensen's missing compass, the one item of his that hadn't been found at his campsite. A gift, Kane said wonderingly, or perhaps a message. I studied the arrangement, then carefully took a photo before leaving it undisturbed. Some things belonged to the forest. On our hike back, we agreed that Kane would keep his footage as evidence, but not release it publicly. At least, not yet. I would monitor the situation in the reserve, ensuring the logging operation faced consequences for the illegal traps and, hopefully, would be forced to scale back its activities. Will you stay? Kane asked as we approached the ranger station, knowing what's out there. I thought about it, remembering those intelligent eyes watching us from the darkness, the careful way they had led us to help someone in need. Yes, I decided. Someone needs to be guardian of this place, for them and for us. Kane smiled, understanding. I'll check in periodically, compare notes. I'd like that, I replied honestly. As Kane departed for Vancouver to analyze his samples, I sat on the porch of my cabin that evening, watching the mist roll across Lake Manitou. The forest seemed different now, not just trees and wildlife, but a living community with secrets I was only beginning to understand. From deep within the woods came that distinctive call again, a long melodic sound that carried across the water. This time, I didn't feel fear. Instead, I felt a strange kinship with whatever was out there, watching from the shadows, guardian of the people, guardian of the forest. Perhaps in this remote wilderness they amounted to the same thing. The calling stopped, and silence settled over the trees. But I knew they were still there, just beyond sight. And for now, That was enough. The first time I heard it, I was splitting firewood outside my cabin. A low, guttural sound that hung in the crisp Alaskan air. Not quite a growl, not quite human. I paused mid-swing, my axe suspended above the chopping block as I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved in the dense wall of pines surrounding Lake Takani, but the hairs on my neck stood rigid. That was 3 weeks into my first season as a ranger at Denali Wilderness Outpost, one of the most remote stations in the Alaskan park system. My name is Akacheta, meaning fighter in Sioux, a name that seemed increasingly appropriate for this posting. I'd chosen this isolation deliberately after 8 years of city life had hollowed me out. The ranger service offered something I desperately needed: purpose in solitude. The outpost consisted of my cabin, a small boathouse, and a watchtower perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. From there I could see 15 miles of pristine wilderness in all directions. Ancient forest, rugged mountains, and the silver mirror of Lake Takani stretching toward the horizon. In spring and summer, the occasional hiker or research team would pass through. But by October, as the first snows began to dust the peaks, I was entirely alone. The radio crackled that evening as I reported in. "Base to Takani Outpost. How's our newest ranger holding up?" The friendly voice of Supervisor Richards broke through the static. "Takani to base, all quiet. Spotted some unusual tracks on the northeast trail this morning. Bigger than black bear, distinct pattern. Might be worth documenting." There was a pause. "Can you describe the tracks?" "About 16 inches long, 5 toes, wider at the front than any bear print I've seen. Almost humanoid." Another pause, longer this time. "Richards, you there?" "I'm here. Listen, there's a folder in the filing cabinet marked Local Observations. Previous rangers have noted similar findings. Best to document but keep perspective. Those mountains play tricks on the eyes." That night I found the folder. It contained decades of handwritten notes from previous rangers. Most documented wildlife sightings, weather patterns, and maintenance logs. But tucked between routine reports were stranger entries, _ October 17, 1978. Woodpile disturbed again. Footprints similar to those reported last month but larger. Measured 18 inches. Found deer carcass 100 yards from cabin, broken in ways inconsistent with predator feeding patterns. _ November 3, 1991. Third night of vocalizations. Ruled out wolf, moose, and bear. Sound appears to come from multiple directions simultaneously, like nothing I've heard in 15 years of service. _ September 29, 2004. Something watches the cabin. Observed shadow movement at tree line every night this week. Motion sensor lights triggered repeatedly. When activated, heard heavy retreat into forest, breaking branches that would require significant force. _ I closed the folder and poured another measure of whiskey. The entries spanned decades, but described remarkably consistent phenomena. As a scientist by training, I'd always dismissed Bigfoot as a myth, a misidentification of known animals. Now, sitting alone in a cabin surrounded by thousands of acres of wilderness, those certainties felt less absolute. The temperature dropped overnight. I woke to frost patterns on my windows and an oppressive silence. Even the ravens that usually cawed from the pines were quiet. I dressed quickly, loaded my pack with essentials, and headed out to check the northeast trail where I'd found the tracks. Fresh snow had fallen, covering yesterday's prints. I hiked 3 miles along the ridge, documenting the landscape with my camera. As I crested the hill overlooking Broken Fir Valley, I stopped cold. Below me, a massive section of forest had been disturbed. Dozens of trees snapped in half, not cut or fallen naturally, but broken at consistent heights of about 8 feet from the ground. The destruction formed a rough circle approximately 50 yards in diameter. I approached cautiously, camera recording. The damage appeared recent. Fresh sap still oozed from the splintered trunks. The trees weren't saplings, but mature pines 30 to 40 years old, their thickness requiring substantial force to snap. Whatever did this possess strength beyond any known local wildlife. As I documented the site, I noticed a smell. Pungent, musky, unmistakably animal, but unlike anything I'd encountered. The odor grew stronger near the center of the circle where the ground had been disturbed. Deep impressions led away from the site, heading deeper into the valley, the same 16-inch prints but fresher. I followed them cautiously, keeping to the tree line. The tracks led to a rock formation with a small opening. Not quite a cave, but a sheltered overhang. The stench intensified. Outside the entrance lay a pile of remains, deer bones, broken and marrow extracted, fish skeletons, and more disturbingly, fragments of what appeared to be camping equipment, a crushed lantern, shredded nylon fabric, a bent cooking pot. My radio suddenly emitted a burst of static, startling me. Through broken transmission, I heard Richard's voice. "Urgent, hikers reported, northwestern sector, respond." I tried to reply, but received only static. Checking my GPS, I noted the location and headed back toward the outpost at a brisk pace. The light was already fading, though it was barely 3 p.m., one of the hazards of Alaskan autumn. By the time I reached my cabin, dark had fully descended. The radio came to life as I entered. "Akacheta, do you copy? Emergency situation." "I copy. What's happening?" "Two hikers missed their check-in. Last known location near your sector. Northwestern Trail, approximately 6 miles from your position. They were supposed to reach the Wolverine Creek shelter last night." "I'll begin search at first light." "Negative. Their emergency beacon activated an hour ago. Coordinates sent to your terminal. Rescue team from Anchorage is 8 hours out minimum. You're all we've got." I checked the terminal. The hiker's beacon showed them deep in the valley, beyond the broken trees, in an area rarely traversed even in good weather. "Understood. I'm heading out now." As I gathered my overnight rescue gear, I hesitated at my rifle cabinet. Park policy discouraged firearms except in emergency wildlife situations. This qualified. I loaded my .30-06, packed extra ammunition, flares, first aid supplies, and enough provisions for 3 people for 48 hours. Outside, the temperature had dropped further. My breath crystallized instantly in the beam of my headlamp. Above, the aurora borealis danced across the stars, casting eerie green shadows across the snow. Beautiful under normal circumstances. Now, just another source of shifting, uncertain light playing tricks on my vision. I set out toward the beacon's coordinates, skirting the edge of the Lake Takani before ascending into the valley. The only sounds were my boots crunching through snow and my measured breathing. I estimated a 4-hour hike to reach the hiker's location. 3 hours in, I entered dense forest. My headlamp created a tunnel of light through absolute darkness. The trees grew thicker here, branches interlocking overhead to block what little moonlight penetrated the clouds. The silence was absolute, unnatural. No wind in the branches, no nocturnal animals, nothing. The stillness broke with a crack like a gunshot, a tree branch breaking somewhere to my left. I swung my light toward the sound, nothing visible. Then another crack behind me. I turned again, rifle ready. Movement caught the edge of my light. Just a glimpse of something large and dark retreating behind a cluster of pines. Too tall and quick for a bear, too large for a moose. "Park Service," I called out, my voice absorbed by the snow and trees. "If you can hear me, respond." The only answer was another branch breaking, closer this time. My light caught a partial impression in the snow, a fresh track, larger than my earlier findings, the snow still settling into the depression. Whatever made it had just passed through. The beacon showed the hikers were less than half a mile ahead. I pressed forward, senses heightened to painful alertness. The trees began to thin, and I entered a small clearing. In the center lay a tent, crushed and torn, equipment scattered across 30 yards. 2 backpacks, contents spilled and partially buried in snow. A cooking stove bent like aluminum foil. And blood, dark patches steaming slightly in the frigid air, fresh enough that it hadn't frozen. The beacon signal originated from one of the packs. No hikers, no bodies, just wreckage. I keyed my radio. "Takani to base. Found the beacon at the coordinates. Signs of violent disturbance. No visual on hikers. Evidence suggests..." I paused, uncertain how to phrase what I was seeing. "Evidence suggests predator attack, large scale, possible casualties. Request immediate backup." Richards's voice came through, broken by static. "Understood. Helicopter, first light, weather permitting. Stay at location, secure scene. A scream pierced the night, human filled with terror coming from the forest beyond the clearing. I shouldered my pack, raised my rifle, and moved toward the sound. What I found there changed everything I believed about the Alaskan wilderness and my place within it. The human scream came again, desperate, cutting through the forest like a blade. I moved toward it, forcing my way through undergrowth frozen solid by the Alaskan cold. My headlamp caught reflective strips on a jacket ahead thrown over a fallen log. More equipment scattered across the ground. A trail of disturbed snow led deeper into the darkness, as if something heavy had been dragged. I followed, rifle ready. 50 yards in, I found the first hiker. He was alive, barely. A man in his 30s, pressed against the base of a massive pine, clutching his leg. Blood soaked through his torn pants. His face, ghostly white in my lamplight, registered both terror and relief at my approach. "Park Service," I said, kneeling beside him. "I'm Ranger Akachita. Where's your partner?" "It took her," he gasped, voice barely audible. "Just grabbed her, like she weighed nothing." I applied a pressure bandage to his leg, 4 deep lacerations, like claw marks, but wider space than any bear would leave. "What did this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. His eyes darted to the darkness beyond my light. "Not supposed to exist," he whispered. "Huge, standing on 2 legs, smelled us from a mile away." I helped him to his feet. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly. "Jordan, you have to find Jordan. It went that way." He pointed northeast, toward higher elevations. "I'll come back with help," I promised, helping him sit on a fallen tree. I gave him my emergency pack with the flare gun. "Stay here. Signal if anything approaches." "Don't!" He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You go after it alone. You won't come back." I gently removed his hand. "There's a second life at stake. I'll be careful." I marked his location on my GPS and continued following the drag marks. They led uphill toward a ridgeline of exposed rock formations. The temperature continued to drop. According to my thermometer, it was now 15 below zero. The cold itself was becoming as dangerous as whatever creature stalked these woods. The path grew steeper. The drag marks showed less resistance now. Either the victim had lost consciousness or worse. After 20 minutes of climbing, the forest opened to a rocky shelf overlooking the valley. Below, Lake Takani reflected the aurora's glow, my cabin a tiny speck on its shore. In better circumstances, the view would have been breathtaking. The trail ended at a crevice in the rock face, a narrow opening leading into darkness. The stench I'd encountered earlier now saturated the air, so powerful I had to breathe through my collar. Blood marked the entrance, fresh and unfrozen. I switched my headlamp to red light to preserve my night vision and keyed my radio. Takani to base, located 1 hiker alive, adult male, injured but stable. The second hiker has been taken into a cave system on the northeast ridge. I'm pursuing. Send rescue team to my GPS coordinates. Only static answered. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. Sunrise wouldn't come until after 9 o'clock this time of year. The helicopter couldn't fly for at least 6 more hours. If the second hiker was still alive, waiting wasn't an option. I entered the crevice. It widened immediately into a tunnel large enough to stand in, descending at a gentle angle into the mountain. The rock walls were smooth in places, as if worn by repeated contact. I moved slowly, rifle raised, every sense straining. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My light revealed a horrifying collection. Backpacks, tents, clothing, all torn and piled against one wall. Some items appeared recent. Others had decayed for what looked like years. A climbing harness still held a permit tag dated 1998. A broken camera contained film never developed. A child's shoe. Beyond the debris, the chamber narrowed into another tunnel. I heard something, a faint whimpering. Human. "Jordan," I called softly. "Park Service, I'm here to help." The whimpering stopped, replaced by a hushed, terrified voice. "Here, I'm here. Please hurry." I moved toward the sound, into the second tunnel. It curved sharply, then opened into a smaller space. My light found her immediately. A woman pinned beneath a fallen rock, her lower body trapped but apparently uninjured. Her eyes, wide with fear, looked past me to the tunnel entrance. "Behind you," she whispered. I turned as my nostrils filled with that overwhelming musk. My light caught movement at the tunnel's mouth, a massive shape blocking our only exit, 8 feet tall at minimum. Broad shoulders covered in thick matted fur. Not a costume, not a bear standing on hind legs, something else entirely. Its proportions were humanoid but exaggerated, with arms hanging to mid-thigh, ending in hands with curved, yellowed claws. The face remained in shadow, but I glimpsed reflective eyes tracking my movement, and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. It didn't charge immediately. It studied us, head tilting in a disturbingly intelligent manner. I raised my rifle slowly, aiming at center mass. "I don't want to shoot," I said, voice steady despite my racing heart. "We're just leaving." The creature responded with a sound I'll hear in nightmares until I die. A low, rumbling growl that transformed into something like speech. Phonetic sounds strung together in a pattern too deliberate to be random animal noise. It took one massive step forward. I fired. The shot exploded in the confined space, deafening us. The creature roared, an earth-shaking sound, and recoiled. I'd hit it, but not critically. It retreated into the tunnel, still blocking our exit, but maintaining distance. "The rock," Jordan gasped. "I can almost get free." I kept my rifle trained on the tunnel while moving to her side. Together we pushed against the stone, pinning her legs. It shifted enough for her to slide free. No broken bones, miraculously, though deep bruising was already visible through tears in her pants. "Can you move?" I asked. She nodded, rising shakily. The creature growled again from the darkness. "There's another way," Jordan whispered. While I was trapped, I felt a draft from behind. She pointed to a narrow fissure in the back wall, barely visible in my light. We approached it cautiously. The opening was tight, but passable. Cold air flowed through it, a connection to the outside. I looked back at the main tunnel where 2 reflective eyes watched from the darkness. "You first," I told Jordan. "I'll cover our retreat." She squeezed into the fissure. I backed toward it slowly, rifle still raised. The creature paced at the tunnel entrance, agitated by the gunshot, but unwilling to charge directly, testing my nerve. "Go," I said to Jordan. "Keep moving." The fissure narrowed painfully as I entered it sideways. My pack caught on the rock. I had to remove it and push it ahead of me. The creature sensed our escape and surged forward with surprising speed. I fired again as it reached the fissure. Another hit, not fatal. It howled in rage, arm thrusting into the narrow opening, claws raking the stone inches from my face. The passage continued for about 30 feet before widening enough to move more freely. Jordan waited just beyond, trembling with cold and fear. "Keep going," I urged. "It can't follow through there." From behind, the creature's roars echoed through the stone. Sounds of immense force striking rock vibrated through the passage. It was trying to widen the opening. We pushed forward, the fissure gradually ascending. After another 50 yards, it opened onto a small ledge halfway down the mountainside. Dawn had begun to lighten the eastern sky, throwing the landscape into gray relief. Below us, the forest stretched to Lake Takani. The cabin was visible, as was a new light source, multiple flashlights moving through the trees. The rescue team had arrived early. I fired a flare into the sky. The flashlights immediately changed direction, moving toward our position. Jordan collapsed onto the snow, exhaustion and injury finally overcoming adrenaline. I gave her my emergency blanket and remaining water. "They're coming," I assured her. "Your friend is safe too. He's down the mountain." She nodded weakly. What was that thing? From inside the mountain, a final roar echoed, frustrated, territorial, ancient. "Something that's been here longer than us," I answered. "Something that will be here after we're gone." 3 hours later, both hikers were evacuated by helicopter. I gave my report to the rescue team leader describing the attack by an unidentified predator. I mentioned the cave system but omitted certain details, the collection of years' worth of human possessions, the almost speech, the intelligence in those eyes. Some truths weren't ready for official reports. That evening, alone again in my cabin, I opened the folder of ranger observations and added my own entry, recording everything I'd witnessed. Future rangers would need all available information. The territory we shared wasn't exclusively ours. As darkness fell, I sat on my porch watching the tree line. Now I understood why I'd been drawn to this remote outpost. Some part of me had always sensed there were mysteries still untouched by human understanding, things beyond our categorization that moved through ancient forests while we slept safely in our constructed certainties. I stayed at Takani Outpost for 3 more seasons. I never encountered the creature directly again, though sometimes at night I heard its call echoing across the lake, a reminder that wilderness doesn't mean uninhabited, only inhabited by something other than us. In those moments, I would touch the scars on my back from where claws had caught me during our escape, a mark I'd concealed from the medical team and my reports. Physical proof that walking between worlds leaves its traces, and that some stories are true whether they're believed or not.